Chapter 1. Ping. Jinwan raised her head in the cold prison. She watched as the prison guard threw a plate of cold food onto the ground. She did not stand up. Why are you pretending to be virtuous? Eat it or not. The prison guard extended his foot into the door, harshly stepping on the food on the ground. After hearing that Jinwan intentionally killed Miss Yun, the Yun family specially ordered to torture her. Jinwan sat in the corner, her gaze unfocused as she stared at the dirty food that could no longer be eaten. From the surveillance room outside the door, the sound of the television being switched on could be heard. Shine Group's CEO Mo Jingshan returned to the country today. He has already arrived in Haicheng. Shine Group is Asia's largest financial company. Mo Jingshan officially took over the management of the company 7 years ago. Right now, his position as a business giant is unshakable. Jinwan's silent expression instantly froze. She rushed to the door, trying to stretch her head out to look. The prison guard turned back, only to see her squatting by the door in a flustered and frightened manner. Her hands gripped the cold door tightly, but her eyes were fixed on the television. Her eyes were red. What are you looking at? Do you know who the news is talking about? A woman like you probably doesn't even have the right to carry his shoes. Jinwan lowered her head, her eyes filled with a bitter smile. Yes, right now, she did not even have the right to carry Mo Jingshan's shoes. Even if the man who had become the CEO of Shine Group was still her husband 10 years ago. It was her own pride, arrogance, willfulness, and stubbornness that caused her to push away this man who had always doted on her in the palm of his hand. For a whole 10 years he did not appear again. But what was on the television earlier? Mo Jingshan had returned? He had returned from America? From the television came the voices of the reporters. CEO Mo, I heard that you got married 2 months ago in America. This time did you bring your beloved wife back? Jinwan's gaze trembled. He got married? That's right. Not to mention his current status, 10 years ago he was also an influential figure in Haicheng. He was as handsome as a god, unmatched in the world. Countless young ladies from influential families lined up to marry him. Right now he must be very happy. CEO Mo, you rarely appear in front of the media. Since you have returned to the country, please tell us about Shine Group's current situation. The lady following behind is Mrs. Mo? Mrs. Mo is indeed very beautiful. A sweet female voice then sounded, I'm sorry Mr. Mo does not accept media interviews. Everyone please make way. Hearing that voice, Jinwan felt as though she had been struck by lightning. That voice belonged to her sister Menggran. Ji Menggran had disappeared before the Ji family went bankrupt. Back then, when they were arguing for divorce, it was this good sister of hers who instigated her to use all sorts of unreasonable methods, including cutting her wrists to commit suicide, causing Mo Jingshan to drift further and further away from her until the divorce. Jinwan immediately laughed, laughing so hard that her heart and lungs hurt. Since President Mo doesn't want to be interviewed, can Mrs. Mo say a few words? The reporters were still asking questions. Ji Menggran followed closely behind Mo Jingshan, a smile on her face. At this moment, Mo Jingshan spoke up. His voice was clear and heavy without any warmth. She's not Mrs. Mo. The smile on Ji Menggran's face instantly froze. She pulled the corners of her mouth to hide her embarrassment. She really wasn't. The surrounding reporters fell into a strange silence until a voice rang out. I heard that after CEO Mo divorced 10 years ago, he never remarried. Jinwan could not hear the voice from the television clearly. The sudden, intense pain in her abdomen caused her to curl up on the ground. She felt as though there was blood flowing out of her chest, rushing out of her throat. Those people had given her 3 months of slow-acting poison in the prison. Finally, was her life about to come to an end? Hot? So hot, Jinwan gradually regained consciousness. Her lower body suddenly felt a tearing pain. It was as though she had been ruthlessly penetrated. The pain caused her body to stiffen. She whimpered, but the man on top of her sealed it with a kiss. When she woke up again, Jinwan opened her eyes to see the luxurious chandelier above her. Beneath her was a soft and expensive silk blanket. She felt as though she was lying on a soft cloud. It was unbelievably comfortable. Where was this? She sat up, looking at her surroundings in shock. This was clearly Haicheng's Yu Garden. It was her and Mo Jingshan's wedding room. Why did she return here? Didn't the Yu Garden close down a few years ago because it had been empty for too long? The soreness in her lower body reminded her that this was not a dream. She lowered her head to look at her own body. Her youthful body was soft and fair, as though it had not experienced the hardships of the past 10 years. Her bare shoulders and collarbone were covered with love bites, She quickly lifted the blanket and got off the bed. Enduring the discomfort between her legs, she rushed into the bathroom to look at herself in the mirror. 10 years ago, as the daughter of Hai Cheng's #1 socialite, Jin Wan had a face that everyone envied. Her beauty was indescribable. Any man who saw her would instantly feel their bones soften. As long as she smiled slightly, countless men would be willing to give their lives to her. Jin Wan stared in disbelief at the beautiful face in the mirror. She had been reborn? Before she could recover from her shock, the room door was suddenly pushed open. A sweet voice with a hint of probing rang, "Big sister, last night you and brother Jing Shen?" Seeing the marks on Jin Wan's body, the voice instantly became sharp. "You slept together?" Jin Wan was startled. She turned around and saw Ji Mingran's ugly expression. This scene was so familiar. Not only had she been reborn, she had been reborn back to 10 years ago. The month before her and Mo Jingshan's divorce. Last night, it was the first time she and Mo Jingshan slept together after half a year of marriage. She had always been against this so-called family marriage and stubbornly wanted a divorce. Mo Jingshan had always been concerned about her feelings and had never forced her. In the month before the divorce, he still endured all of her temper. Because she said she did not want to see him, he stayed at the company until late at night. He would either wait for her to fall asleep before returning, or he would stay at the company. And everything that happened last night was Ji Mingran's idea. She said that as long as she drugged Mo Jingshan's wine and found a woman for him to accuse him of having an affair, Jin Wan could forcefully apply for a divorce. However, what kind of person was Mo Jingshan? Even if he did not set up any defenses at home, the moment he realized there was a problem with the wine, he coldly rejected anyone's contact. He angrily dragged Jin Wan, who was about to escape, into their marital room. It was also this night that Jin Wan saw Mo Jingshan's other side for the first time. He was not as gentle as he appeared on the surface. It was not as if he could allow her to run amok forever. He pressed her down on the bed, ignoring her cries and punches. Not only did he solidify their status as husband and wife, he also tormented her for an entire night. Chapter 2. Everything that happened last night was so clear, so she had really been reborn. "Big sister, didn't we agree that after brother Jingshan drinks that cup of wine, I'll send him out of the Yu Garden?" Ji Mingran walked behind her, her tone concealing her unwillingness as she questioned. Jin Wan turned around, looking at her younger sister who often came to the Yu Garden to spend the night after they got married. Not noticing the coldness that flashed past Jin Wan's eyes, Ji Mingran only complained softly, "But why did you sleep on his bed?" Hearing this, Jin Wan asked with a smile that did not seem like a smile, "His bed? Isn't this our wedding room? I'm anxious for you. Now that the plan has been disrupted, who knows how long your divorce will be delayed." Ji Mingran instinctively furrowed her brows. Jin Wan walked up to her and looked at the see-through top she was wearing and the seductive makeup she had deliberately put on. Jin Wan calmly said, "Mingran, why are you wearing so little? Thankfully, I didn't ask you to send him out last night. If something had happened, I wouldn't be able to answer to my family." Ji Mingran hurriedly hid the guilt in her eyes. "It was too hot last night, so I changed into a thinner set of clothes. It's early autumn now. Is it very hot?" "It's not especially hot. Big sister, since the plan didn't succeed, I think you should pretend to commit suicide." Ji Mingran inexplicably felt that something was wrong. She cautiously changed the topic. "Suicide?" Jin Wan dragged out her words. Now that she thought about it carefully, ever since they got engaged, Ji Mingran seemed to have changed into a different person. She would often talk about the dark secrets of rich marriages and bring up all kinds of failed marriages in front of her. This scared Jin Wan, who originally did not want to get married, even more. She became even more afraid of marriage and did not dare to get close to Mo Jingshan. "How about cutting his wrist? If he sees that you'd rather die than stay by his side, perhaps he'll agree to your request." Ji Mingran suggested innocently. "There's a risk in doing this. What if I lose too much blood and no one comes to save me?" Jin Wan smiled, but her smile did not have any warmth. "Aya, what are you worried about? Regardless of whether brother Jingshan rushes back or not, if there's any danger, I'll immediately call the doctor over." Jin Wan's expression did not change as she stared at Ji Mingran, who was only a year younger than her. She did not forget that when she cut her wrist, she lay in the bathtub filled with hot water. She had lost too much blood and was unable to get up. However, Ji Mingran did not call for a doctor to save her. She did not even inform Mo Jingshan. If it weren't for Mo Jingshan's sudden return, smashing the door open and carrying her out of the blood-soaked bathtub, Jinwan most likely would not have survived to the day they divorced. Jinwan's lips curved coldly. She smiled lazily and casually. I'll consider it. But after all, I didn't sleep at all last night. Right now, I just want to rest well. Ji Minggran hid the trace of jealousy in her eyes when she heard him say that he didn't sleep at all last night. She bit her lip and said, "Then, you must think about it carefully. I'll come find you tomorrow." "Alright, I won't send you off." Jinwan stood in her spot, watching as Ji Minggran's figure disappeared from her sight. The room was silent. Jinwan turned to look at the bridal room that had been engraved in the depths of her memories. Her hands gently caressed the soft blankets. It was as though the warmth that Mo Jingshan had left behind could still be felt. Everything she could start anew. Was there still a need for a divorce? Of course not. In her previous life, she did not have a shrewd heart. She was played by the person closest to her, causing her marriage to collapse. Her father died tragically. She lost everything and was wrongly imprisoned. In this life, she not only wanted to be Mo Jingshan's wife for life. She also wanted to reclaim the dignity and everything that belonged to her. She would never be manipulated by others again. But right now, the biggest problem was, she remembered that in her previous life after last night, Mo Jingshan rarely returned to the U Garden. The last time she saw him was the day she woke up after cutting her wrists. As she wished, he placed the divorce papers by her bedside and promised to leave her world forever. That indifferent and distant expression, she could never forget it. Jinwan rubbed her forehead. That man Mo Jingshan, when he doted on her, he was filled with endless love. When he was cold, he was definitely an iceberg that was hard to melt. How was she going to coax Mo Jingshan back? In the evening, the CEO's assistant, Shin Mu, saw Jinwan, who had suddenly appeared in the company. "Miss Ji, why are you here?" Jinwan was not in a hurry to correct the way the other party addressed her. After all, she was the one who had repeatedly refused to allow anyone to call her Mrs. Mo. She scanned the surroundings, asking, "Is he in the company?" Shinmu knew she was talking about CEO Mo. However, he did not know if this little ancestor had come to the company to cause trouble for CEO Mo. CEO Mo is currently in a meeting. I estimate it will take more than an hour before it ends. It's fine. I'll go up and wait for him. After being brought to the CEO's office, Jinwan thanked Assistant Shin and entered alone. This was an extremely modern office. It was spacious and comfortable. The furnishings were simple, but it hid a luxurious and grand visual effect. The most eye-catching thing was the 270-degree floor-to-ceiling window. It was bright and clear. Right now, Mo Jingshan had not returned to take over the family business and was not the CEO of Shine Group. Several years ago, he had established this technology company. In a short span of 3 years, he had monopolized all the major internet technology resources in the country. From 50 million yuan back then, it had grown to the current market value of $2 billion. Right now, Mo Jingshan was already the famous CEO of the Mo Corporation. 4 years later, he would become the global CEO of Shine Group. He would become a legend in the business world. Jinwan waited for nearly an hour but did not see any trace of Mo Jingshan. She did not rest much last night. Today she had been digesting the news of her rebirth. Right now, her eyelids were gradually unable to support themselves. When Mo Jingshan returned to the office, this was the scene he saw. Jinwan was wearing a thin long dress as she lay on the black leather sofa. Her eyes were closed and her pale and peaceful appearance was alluring under the office's dim yellow light. Sensing his gaze on her, Jinwan opened her eyes in alarm. However, she was instantly met with a pair of black eyes that were as cold as the deep sea. She immediately sat up, raising her eyes to look at the man who was indifferently standing in the office. He was just as tall and straight as she remembered. He wore an elegant suit and shirt, and his legs were long and straight under his trousers. His figure was perfect and flawless. His face was also handsome to the point of causing one's hair to stand on end. "You're back." Jinwan immediately stood up. Mo Jingshan calmly responded, walking toward the office desk. Jinwan did not think through her actions. She subconsciously rushed to follow him, stepping forward to hold his arm. This action not only caused Mo Jingshan's figure to falter. Even Jinwan herself felt awkward. She did not know whether to retract her arm or not. She seemed to have never been so proactive toward him. Chapter 3. Jinwan raised her eyes, asking him, "Do you want to return to the U Garden for dinner tonight?" Mo Jingshan loosened his collar and did not speak. "I learned how to cook from Auntie Chen." Hearing this, Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "You cook?" From his words, it was as though she, Jinwan, was a rich young lady who did not do housework. Even if she was once like that, it was no longer the same now. And do you want to go back and have a taste? Jinwan gazed at him, a smile appearing on her face. Mo Jingshan's smile was cold. You couldn't drug me, so you changed it to poison me? As expected, she had too many black marks. Drugging him only happened last night. In the past. Jinwan thought about it and felt that she had been too willful. The past was still vivid in her mind and it was truly absurd. Jinwan raised her head to look at him. The light landed on her neck. He was not sure if she did it intentionally or not, but the ambiguous marks on her collarbone fell into his eyes. You tortured me for an entire night just by drugging me. If I had poisoned you, the first person to die would have been me. She spoke calmly. Her gaze was equally calm. Mo Jingshan's gaze was dark as he watched her. He did not hold back last night. This morning, when he saw her lying weakly under the blankets, covered in marks from his actions, he did not wish to see her continue arguing for a divorce after waking up, so he directly returned to the company. He did not expect that she would take the initiative to look for him. After last night, based on your hatred for me, it's not impossible for you to die with me, Mo Jingshan said coldly. Die with me? I might as well tie a ticking time bomb to my body to look for you. Wouldn't that be more straightforward? Mo Jingshan did not pay her any more attention. Jinwan stood in his office for a long time, staring at him. Even though Mo Jingshan was focused on his work and treated her like air, she still stood there and stared at him. Mo Jingshan rubbed his brows. What exactly do you want? I want to eat with you, Jinwan replied, simple and direct. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. For the sake of a divorce, you're really willing to do anything. What show are you singing now? This man, when the soft approach didn't work, he wanted her to use the hard way? She walked up and leaned on the desk, watching him work from a close distance. It was said that men were the most charming when they were serious. She wanted to say that her husband was charming all the time. What was wrong with her brain back then? Do you really want a divorce? The document in front of Mo Jingshan was flipped open. Jinwan reached out to block it. She had noticed that he was looking at the company's quarterly report. Even if she messed up, it wouldn't affect him much. Move your hand away. Mo Jingshan could no longer ignore her. Jinwan leaned her face closer to him and said with a smile, Tell me, do you want to go back? Jinwan indeed had a face that could turn the world upside down. Right now, her smile was as lively and moving as that of a teenage girl. He said lightly, I'm working. Jinwan blinked her eyes, unmoved. I can wait for you to finish your work before we return to the U Garden. There's a video conference at the company tonight. You can go back first. He looked away, still indifferent. It's all right, I'll wait for you. Mo Jingshan abruptly closed the document in his hands, looking at her coldly. What tricks do you want to play now? Jinwan's expression was especially calm. She even purposely glanced at him. I've already slept with you. What other tricks can I play? Mo Jingshan really wanted to throw her out. He really did go for the video conference. Mo Jingshan did not plan on giving her any extra time. 2 hours passed, but Mo Jingshan did not return. Jinwan had just fallen asleep on the sofa when she abruptly woke up. Would he leave her hanging like this? Would he let her sleep in the office for the entire night? After all, she had indeed gone overboard in the past. If he really left her hanging like this, it was not impossible. After thinking about it, Jinwan stood up and pushed open another door in the CEO's office. As expected, it was the resting room in Mo Jingshan's office. Inside there was a bathroom, a bed and some simple daily necessities. Jinwan was used to showering before 10 o'clock p.m. In her previous life, when she was imprisoned for 3 months, she was only allowed to shower once a month. She always felt as though there were cockroaches and ants crawling on her body. Right now, she was even more sensitive to the slightest bit of sweat on her body. Should she take the chance to shower before Mo Jingshan returned? She walked in. Because she did not have any clothes to change into, she found a white men's shirt in the closet and brought it into the bathroom. 10 minutes passed. When Mo Jingshan ended the meeting and returned, Jinwan was nowhere to be seen. The office was quiet. The only thing left was the faint scent of Jinwan's body. Mo Jingshan looked at the empty office and paused in silence for a long time. He was just about to enter to pick up his suit jacket when he suddenly heard rustling sounds from the break room. She hadn't left yet? After showering, Jinwan walked out of the bathroom wearing Mo Jingshan's shirt. As she walked, she dried her long hair that was still dripping with water. The sound of the door opening came from the front. She subconsciously raised her head and was shocked to see Mo Jingshan appear by the door. Her hand that was drying her hair froze for a moment. Mo Jingshan clearly did not expect to see such a scene after entering. Jinwan was showering in his place. She was even wearing his shirt in the dimly lit room. Her eyes were misty and dazed. His shirt was very large and the collar occasionally slid down from her shoulders, revealing her snow-white skin. Jinwan was suddenly burned by Mo Jingshan's gaze. She subconsciously pressed her legs together, and her face heated up because she was completely naked under his shirt. "I thought you would leave me here tonight and not come back." She put down the towel, explaining why she had uninvited herself into his break room. Mo Jingshan shifted his eyes away. "Wear your own clothes." "I didn't bring a change of clothes, but earlier I called the U Garden. Someone should be sending it over soon." She walked toward him as she spoke. "Are you done with your work now? Then can you follow me back to the U Garden?" Mo Jingshan silently watched this woman who was not afraid of death and dared to dress like this. "What time is it now? It should be very late, right?" Jinwan muttered to herself while hugging his arm. She looked at the time on his Patek Philippe men's watch. It was already 10 o'clock in the evening. The watch was very nice and suited his cold and noble temperament. How on earth did such a classy man fall for her? Jinwan was about to release her hand when she suddenly felt her wrist tighten. Mo Jingshan had pulled her against the wall by the side, pressing her firmly between the wall and his body. "Jinwan, what do you mean by this?" His gaze was deep and his cold voice was low and hoarse with a hint of danger. Jinwan stared at him for a long time before speaking up. Her tone was slow and firm. "Starting from last night, I want to seriously reconsider our relationship." Mo Jingshan indifferently watched her. "You're suddenly so sensible? What's the price? Divorce?" In her previous life she had suffered greatly from the divorce. Jinwan's bright gaze met his. Chapter 4. Mo Jingshan's gaze trembled as he stepped back. Jinwan did not know where her courage came from. She stood on her tiptoes and once again sent her lips forward. She stubbornly tugged at his collar, unwilling to let go. She refused to let go. Mo Jingshan pushed her away slightly roughly, scolding hoarsely, "Jinwan, do you know what you're doing?" "I know. I'm very clear-headed." Jinwan pressed closer to him, her clear eyes watching him. "Mo Jingshan, tonight I'll stay with you at the company or go home together. You choose." The night could conceal many things, but it could not conceal the determination in Jinwan's eyes. Mo Jingshan stared at her for a long moment. Jinwan returned his gaze without any fear. In the end, Mo Jingshan did not answer her. However, his action of placing his jacket on her was the most direct answer he could give. Seeing this silent action, Jinwan's eyes became slightly hot. He was clearly still angry at her, yet he could not help but treat her well. She really hated herself for being so cruel and unscrupulous. On the way back to the U Garden, Jinwan sat in Mo Jingshan's car. Her fair fingers played with the seatbelt in front of her. From time to time, she shifted her eyes, secretly glancing at the man who was calm and indifferent as he drove. The streetlights and neon lights outside shone in through the car window. His clear brows were hidden under the colorful night. Thinking of what she had done in the past, based on Mo Jingshan's powerful family background and everything he had, he could easily leave her at home and go out to play with female celebrities or women from the socialite circle whenever and wherever he wanted. However, it seemed like he had never taken a second glance at those women. She abruptly opened her mouth to break the silence in the car. "The Mo family's chauffeur rarely appears. Do you usually drive back by yourself?" "Occasionally." "You didn't sleep much last night and you've worked all day today. Aren't you tired?" Hearing this, Mo Jingshan glanced at her. That gaze seemed to be saying, "Wasn't it all thanks to her that I didn't sleep last night?" Jinwan immediately turned her head away from his meaningful gaze. Her ears were slightly hot. "What I mean is, don't neglect your health because of work. In the future, when you have to leave work, go home. When you have to rest, go." Before she could finish her sentence, suddenly, a large overloaded truck sped from the intersection in front of them. It did not slow down when it turned, as if it had lost control of the brakes and rushed straight in their direction. "Be careful." Jinwan hurriedly called out. Mo Jingshan had already turned the car around, avoiding the truck that was charging toward them. The ear-piercing sound of brakes rang out. Jinwan had been holding on to her seatbelt, causing her body to lose its protection. She rushed forward and hit her head. She cried out in pain. "Did it hurt?" Mo Jingshan immediately reached out and carefully examined her slightly red forehead. "See, don't touch." Jinwan's face scrunched up in pain as she pushed his hand away from her head. Mo Jingshan pressed her down, raised his hand to touch the back of her head, and sternly forced her to turn her head around. He saw that her head was not light. Soon, it was red and swollen, and even her eyes were red from the pain. He furrowed his brows. Very badly? Very painful? Are you dizzy? Painful. Jinwan's voice was soft. Actually, it was just a bump. At most, it would be swollen tomorrow. She did not want to be too spoiled, but when she caught sight of the heartache and concern in his eyes, she subconsciously wanted to be spoiled. Mo Jingshan's concern, this sense of belonging that she had not felt in a long time. Her husband, who was so close to her and would still care for her, was really good. I'll send you to the hospital. Mo Jingshan pushed her to sit properly and helped her fasten her seat belt. The moment Jinwan heard the word hospital, she shivered. She rushed to press her head with her hand. It's not that serious. It's already so late. It's best not to trouble the doctor. Mo Jingshan did not give her any chance to refuse, using his gaze to warn her not to move. I'm really fine. There was a city hospital nearby. Mo Jingshan ignored her soft protests and directly sent her to the consultation room. It was only after Jinwan's forehead was covered with medicine and the doctor confirmed that her injury would only swell for a few days and that she would not even have a slight concussion did he finally agree to bring her home. The moment they returned to the Yew Garden, Auntie Chin saw the obvious horn on Jinwan's forehead. She ran over with a surprised expression and helped her to sit on the sofa as though she was too weak to stand up to a gust of wind. Miss Ji, what's wrong? Does it hurt? Jinwan smiled. It's all right. It's just a bump. It'll be fine in 2 days. Aya, why is it so swollen? Have you seen the doctor? I've already seen it. Auntie Chin nodded. She suddenly returned to her senses and realized that Jinwan seemed to have returned with Mr. Mo earlier. Jinwan also raised her head to look at Mo Jingshan. She saw that he said a few words to the helper by the door and then walked in without looking at her. Auntie Chin, in the future, you can just call me Mrs. Mo or young madam. Either is fine, Jinwan suddenly said before Mo Jingshan walked far away. Auntie Chin was stunned for a moment before she immediately put on a joyful expression. Aye, madam. Mrs. Mo. It seemed like Miss Ji had thought things through and was finally going to live happily with Mr. Mo. Furthermore, they had returned together earlier. Auntie Chin happily went to prepare supper. Jinwan glanced at the time and stood up to say, You guys go rest. I'll make supper. Madam? Auntie Chin looked at her in surprise. How could a rich young lady like Jinwan know how to cook? In the past, she could not even stand the smell of cooking oil in the kitchen. You have a wound on your head. How can you make supper? Go back to your room and sleep early. Mo Jingshan finally returned. Jinwan did not respond. She only said to Auntie Chen and the other helpers, It's late. Go rest. Auntie Chen originally wanted to speak, but seeing that Mr. Mo had returned, she immediately shut her mouth. She nodded and left the hall. You probably haven't eaten tonight. It's already so late. Cooking noodles is the easiest. Wait for me. She looked at Mo Jingshan and turned to head to the kitchen. Mo Jingshan held her wrist the moment she passed. He stared at her for a moment to make sure she was not joking. He asked mildly, You know how? Jinwan's lips curved up. She was still very confident in her current cooking skills, but she did not deliberately boast. I'm not sure if it'll taste good, but it'll definitely be cooked. Mo Jingshan glanced at the wound on her head. Although he did not plan to let her enter a place like the kitchen, seeing her excited appearance did not dampen her rare interest. He released her hand. Jinwan could feel the warmth of his palm on her slender wrist. Chapter 5. Not long after, Jinwan came out with 2 bowls of piping hot noodles. When she turned back, she saw that Mo Jingshan was on the phone. After Mo Jingshan ended the call, he turned back to see that Jinwan was sitting by the dining table, watching him anxiously. This was the first time in her 2 lives that Jinwan had personally cooked for him. Although she appeared calm on the surface, her heart was still slightly nervous. The 2 bowls of noodles on the dining table were filled with fragrance and flavor. Mo Jingshan walked over. All the helpers had already gone to rest. Earlier, Jinwan was indeed the only one in the kitchen. It seemed like Jinwan had really made the noodles. Mo Jingshan glanced at it. When did you learn to cook? I learned it a long time ago. It's just that you don't know. Jinwan blinked at him. I promised to let you come home for dinner today. Even if it's just a bowl of noodles, I didn't go back on my word. Mo Jingshan did not ask further. Seeing that her eyes were filled with anticipation, he picked up the chopsticks she handed over and tasted it. This man's movements when eating were natural and elegant. Jinwan could not shift her eyes away. In the past she had never looked at Mo Jingxian so closely. But now, with each additional glance, she felt her heart heat up and beat wildly. If not for Ji Mingran's interference and sowing discord, she would have fallen in love with him a long time ago, wouldn't she? After being stared at by Jin Wan for a long time, Mo Jingxian glanced at her. "What are you looking at? Is there something on my face?" Jin Wan took a deep breath. She felt that if tonight ended in a bowl of noodles, she would feel a little unwilling. "Move your things back to the master bedroom," Jin Wan said as her face reddened slightly. Mo Jingxian finished the noodles and placed down his chopsticks. After a moment of silence, he calmly said, "I'll be in the study tonight. I have something to take care of. Rest early." After finishing his words, the tall man had already stood up and turned to leave. Jin Wan, did he misunderstand her intentions? She was not going to take the initiative to offer her body and seduce him into agreeing to the divorce. She was really going to have a good life. Jin Wan immediately stood up. She saw that Mo Jingxian was already on the phone with the company's secretary. She could tell that he had important matters to take care of tonight. She could only support her chin with one hand as she sat by the table, watching Mo Jingxian's tall and straight back. He thought that he had won the first battle today, but in the end he fell at the last moment. She knew this man Mo Jingxian wouldn't be so easy to deal with. It was late at night. Jin Wan could not sleep. She got up and went downstairs to pour a glass of milk. She was about to pour a glass for Mo Jingxian. However, in her impression, Mo Jingxian did not seem to like drinking this kind of thing. She paused in the act of pouring the milk. She turned around and walked upstairs to the door of the study. He pressed his ear against the door to listen to the movements inside, but he could barely hear anything. It was early autumn, so the corridor was a little cold. The time gradually approached 3 in the morning, and the door of the study suddenly opened. Jin Wan? As soon as Mo Jingxian came out, he immediately saw the figure who had fallen asleep by the door. Jin Wan absent-mindedly raised her head. "You're done?" Mo Jingxian pulled her up with an ugly expression. "Don't you know what time it is? Why are you sleeping here?" Jin Wan did not speak. Mo Jingxian brought her into the study, and she finally had a chance to take a good look at the place he often stayed in after returning to the Yew Garden. It was as clean and tidy as his office. There were 2 computers displaying the company's data, and some company documents were placed on the table. Mo Jingxian saw that she was only wearing a thin nightgown and felt the coldness of her hands. He pressed her down on the sofa in the study and placed a coat over her body. He then stood in front of her and looked at Jin Wan. "Jin Wan, how old are you? Are you a child? Don't you know that sleeping in the corridor in this weather will cause you to catch a cold? I only wanted to wait for you to finish your work and talk to you. In the end, I ended up falling asleep while I was waiting. It's not early anymore. If you want to talk, wait until tomorrow." Mo Jingxian looked at her small face that was pale from the cold earlier. Since she had not rested much since yesterday, there were faint patches of dark circles under her eyes. Right now, there was nothing more important than for her to hurry back to sleep. Jin Wan still wanted to speak, but she was directly brought out of the study. Her hand was held in his warm palm, and he did not give her any chance to resist. He directly sent her back to the master bedroom, and with a ping sound he closed the door. Mo Jingxian returned to the study and closed the data on the computer. He went to the master bedroom next door to take a shower. He had just laid down when he suddenly heard the door open. Jin Wan, who had obediently returned to the bedroom earlier, quietly ran in. She then unceremoniously pulled aside his blanket and climbed onto the bed. "Mo Jingxian, Jin Wan." He softly sighed. "Regardless of whether you retreat to advance or advance to retreat, it's impossible for us to get a divorce. Hurry and go back to sleep, en?" Jin Wan buried her face in the blanket by his side, saying gloomily, "That's for the best. Mo Jingxian, remember what you said today. In the future, no matter what, we won't get a divorce." Mo Jingxian appeared as though he did not hear her words. He directly held her shoulders and lifted her up, suspecting if there was something wrong with her brain today. Jin Wan was about to speak when Mo Jingxian suddenly placed his hand on her head, causing her to pause. She allowed his hand to caress her forehead. In the end, his warm fingertips avoided her swollen forehead. "You don't have a fever?" he calmly said after caressing her head. "It doesn't seem like you took the wrong medicine." Jin Wan did not speak. Her 2 hands tightly gripped onto his blanket. She had a righteous look on her face, as if she was determined to sleep with him no matter what. However, the white and tender toes that were exposed outside the quilt revealed the nervousness and shyness in her heart. Her toes were slightly curled up, and there was a trace of indescribable cuteness. Mo Jingshin lowered his eyes to take a look. Without batting an eyelid, he covered her with the blanket again to prevent her from catching a cold. Even though it was a very natural and unintentional action, Jinwan's heart warmed. She returned her feet under the blanket and unintentionally rubbed against his thigh. "Don't move," Mo Jingshin softly warned. "I didn't do it on purpose." Seeing his dark gaze, she subconsciously retracted her foot. However, she retracted her foot too harshly. As she lifted it up, she abruptly touched a place that she should not have touched. Even through his pants, she was clearly burned there. Her movements instantly froze. The air seemed to have fallen into a strange silence. Jinwan subconsciously licked her lips. She suddenly felt that her mouth and throat were dry and irritated. Mo Jingshin abruptly flipped over and pressed her under his body. Jinwan's voice directly choked in her throat. Chapter 6. I really didn't do it on purpose, you? Mo Jingshin kissed her. This was different from when Jinwan had randomly nibbled on his lips. In an instant, she felt as if an electric current had run through her body. She trembled and felt numb from head to toe. Although she had already been married for half a year and had her first experience last night, Jinwan was still inexperienced. She was so immature that she did not even know how to respond. She only carefully moved the tip of her tongue, but the man on top of her deepened his kiss. The kiss was deep and heavy, almost taking away all her breath. Jinwan closed her eyes dizzily, but she suddenly felt Mo Jingshin's kiss move to her sensitive ear. His low and husky voice pressed against her ear. "It's almost daybreak. If you don't sleep now, don't even think about sleeping tonight." She abruptly opened her eyes, and in the blink of an eye, she was met with a pair of deep, pitch-black eyes. "Mrs. Mo, you were in so much pain last night. Are you sure you can take it tonight?" Before coming here, Jinwan had only wanted to lie down with him and have a good talk. Although she had considered the possibility of what might happen, the memory of how she cried herself hoarse from last night's pain and how he did not let her off even after she cried herself hoarse entered her mind. She immediately shrank back. However, she did not forget that he had just called her Mrs. Mo. Therefore, it wasn't as if all her efforts today were in vain. Since she was still Mrs. Mo and was going to be his wife for the rest of her life, how could she avoid this kind of thing? Will it hurt as much the second time? Her voice was a little muffled. He clearly did not expect her to suddenly ask such a question. He stared at her for a long time, his eyes looking as if he could skin her alive in an instant. However, his gaze fell on the scar on her neck that had yet to fade. Mo Jingshin clearly remembered how badly he had bullied her last night due to the effects of the wine and his anger. It hadn't even been a day. If it happened again, she might not be able to get out of bed for the next few days. Mo Jingshin sighed softly, hoarsely saying, "Don't easily test a man's endurance. I'll let you off tonight, but if you dare to burrow into my embrace tomorrow night, you can try the consequences." Jinwan curled up in his arms and did not speak. "Go back to sleep." Mo Jingshin rubbed her head. Just as he was about to get up, Jinwan hurriedly reached out and hugged his neck. "I'll sleep here." Mo Jingshin's gaze darkened. He looked at the resolute and slightly embarrassed little woman. Jinwan felt a little embarrassed under his gaze. She rushed to withdraw her hands from his neck and quickly grabbed the blanket to cover her face, hiding from his gaze. He chuckled. "Go back to your room if you're shy." "No, I'll sleep here," Jinwan said gloomily under the quilt. Finally, he had no choice but to face her sudden change in personality. Mo Jingshin turned to lie down, but his gaze was fixed on Jinwan, who was hiding under the blanket, refusing to show her head. The surroundings suddenly became very quiet. Jinwan quietly pulled the blanket down. She raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshin lying by the side. His clear and bright gaze was fixed on her. Jinwan was embarrassed. She met his gaze and softly asked, "You're not sleeping? How can I sleep with you lying here?" Jinwan subconsciously glanced at the bed beneath them. "This bed isn't small. It's no different from the bed in the master bedroom. I won't squeeze you if I sleep here. Why can't I sleep?" Mo Jingshin smiled at her words. "What are you smiling at?" Jinwan thought that he still did not believe in her sincerity. She snuggled closer to him under the blanket, expressing that she really did not plan on living apart from him. "Jinwan." He suddenly called her name. His voice was low and husky. "You should have been so self-aware." Jinwan subconsciously leaned against him again. She could not listen to his words anymore. If she did, she was afraid that she would not be able to sleep at night. Because of her movement, Mo Jingshin abruptly pinched her chin. He bent down and gave her a deep kiss. He only released her when Jinwan's breathing became ragged. If they continued kissing, neither of them would be able to sleep tonight. Jinwan's face turned red from the kiss. She squirmed into the blanket, but Mo Jingshan suddenly got off the bed. She rushed to sit up, hugging the blanket. "Where are you going?" Mo Jingshan did not turn back as he entered the bathroom. He only threw down 2 words, "Shower." Jinwan was stunned. Didn't he just shower? What was there to shower for? It was only when she heard the sound of running water from the bathroom that she finally understood. Her face was flushed and she almost laughed out loud. She laid back down, hugging the blanket in her arms. She breathed in the clean scent that belonged to Mo Jingshan. At 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a thin mist. Jinwan woke up from the nightmare of her previous life. She opened her eyes and abruptly sat up on the bed. The seat by her side was already empty. The silence in the room caused her heart to feel empty. She quickly pulled the blanket aside and got off the bed. However, because her movements were too fast, she staggered and reached out to grab onto the table by the side. The sound of the door being pushed open came from the front. Jinwan raised her head to see Mo Jingshan standing there, dressed neatly. He appeared to have just woken up. He had just showered and was dressed in a shirt and long pants, clean and fresh. "Are you not feeling well?" Mo Jingshan saw that Jinwan's face was pale to the point of being translucent and walked over. However, Jinwan had been staring at him the entire time. Even when he approached and when he placed his hand on her head in concern, she was still staring at his movements. It turned out that everything that happened yesterday was not a dream. Mo Jingshan retracted his hand due to her gaze. In the past she was very resistant to his touch. Perhaps yesterday's abnormality was due to a nightmare? Was she awake today? Was she going to push him away with all her might? Dizzy? He did not continue touching her. "It might be the repercussions from hitting your head last night. Go for a brain CT scan today. I'll call Auntie Chin over to help you change your clothes." After finishing his words, Mo Jingshan's gaze was indifferent as he turned to leave. Mo Jingshan. Jinwan did not even think before calling out to him. The man who had just turned away turned back. Jinwan abruptly bumped into his embrace. Mo Jingshan's body faltered. He subconsciously raised his arms to hold her, but the little woman in his arms was 1 step ahead of him. She hugged his straight back tightly, her hands wrapped tightly around his waist. He was startled by her actions for 2 seconds. He then lowered his eyes to look at the little head in his embrace. He placed his hand on her head and patted it comfortingly. "If you're not feeling well, go to the hospital, N?" Jinwan did not speak. She only hugged him tightly, breathing in the morning scent of the man's body. "Did you have a nightmare?" he asked. "N?" Jinwan was still hugging his straight back tightly. She was filled with reliance and was unwilling to let go. Her voice was slightly hoarse as she said, "I dreamed that you didn't want me anymore. I dreamed that you left for 10 years. Later on, you even married another woman." Because she had just woken up, her voice was soft and lazy. It was rare for her to act like a spoiled child. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head, speaking softly, "Don't let your imagination run wild. I will never marry anyone other than you." Jinwan buried her face in his embrace and did not refute him. No matter what happened in her previous life, in this life, she would never let him go. "Does your head still hurt?" "It doesn't hurt. I woke up too quickly and couldn't stand properly. It's all right. Auntie Chen has already prepared breakfast. Wash up and go downstairs to eat." Chapter 7. Jinwan sorted out her emotions and realized that she had not combed her hair or washed her face after waking up. She was standing in front of him. She immediately raised her hand to scratch her hair in embarrassment. She then covered her face and turned to head to the bathroom. Mo Jingshan glanced at her awkward and embarrassed appearance. His elegant and deep brows moved slightly. "It's not like it's our first day of marriage. It's not like it's the first time I've seen you when you just woke up. Why are you covering yourself?" This had nothing to do with how long they had been married. It was because Jinwan had never been aware that she was married. She did not explain and ran into the bathroom to check if her eyes were swollen from sleeping. She lowered her head to find that there were no toiletries for her in the bathroom. She did not know if Mo Jingshan would directly move his things back to the master bedroom after last night. She decided to take advantage of the fact that Mo Jingshan had already left the room to run back to the master bedroom. She opened the cabinet in the bathroom and moved the spare toiletries she was used to into his room. This way, no matter which room he stayed in, it would be occupied by her. Let's see where else he could hide. Jinwan changed her clothes and went downstairs to eat breakfast. On the table was the creamy yellow toast that she had always loved to eat. She had just sat down when Mo Jingshan placed a cup of warm milk in front of her. Jinwan sat by the table and accepted the milk. She ate a mouthful of toast and raised her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan. She drank another mouthful of milk and raised her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan again. As she ate breakfast, her eyes did not leave Mo Jingshan's body at all. Auntie Chin, who was tidying up the cutlery by the side, beamed with joy. She quietly dragged the helper by the side back to the kitchen. Jinwan took another bite of toast. The creamy yellow sauce stuck to the corner of her lips, but she did not notice it. Her eyes were fixed on the man who had already finished his breakfast and was casually flipping through a business magazine. His clear and handsome brows, high nose bridge, and handsome features that seemed to have been created by the hands of God. He was so perfect that no one could find fault with him. Mo Jingshan's hand that was flipping through the pages of the business magazine paused. He calmly glanced at the little woman whose eyes were glued to him. Her gaze seemed as though he would disappear from the face of the earth at any moment. Jinwan abruptly returned to herself. She rushed to raise the toast in her hand to cover her eyes and picked up the glass of milk to fiercely drink. In the end he drank too quickly and choked. He quickly put down his cup and toast and coughed twice. Cough, cough, cough. Mo Jingshan handed a tissue to her. Seeing how badly she was coughing, he helped her wipe away the cream sauce on the corner of her lips. You've been acting strange since yesterday. Why do you like staring at me so much? Cough, cough, cough. In fact, Jinwan didn't choke that badly. Hearing his words, she deliberately coughed a few more times. Auntie Chin came out of the kitchen. Madam, what's wrong? Why is it coughing so badly? Cough, cough, it's nothing. I choked on the milk. That's good. Oh right, Miss Mingran said yesterday that she'll be staying in the U Garden today. Should I prepare an extra portion for her? Jinwan's expression did not change. After coughing twice, she turned to say, Auntie Chin, tidy up the guest room that my sister often stays in. In the future, try not to let her stay in the U Garden. But young Lady Mingran is coming today. I will make it clear to her. After all, U Garden is not Ji's home. It is not convenient for her to come and go here often. The moment Auntie Chin heard this, her heart instantly felt extremely comfortable. In the past, she always felt that the second miss of the Ji family always came to the U Garden to stay and always liked to ask questions about Mr. Mo. She often inquired about Mr. Mo's whereabouts and did not treat herself as an outsider at all. It was really unbearable. Auntie Chin did not waste a single minute to tidy up the things in the guest room. All of a sudden, Mo Jingshan's phone on the dining table vibrated slightly. Jinwan thought it would be a message like 10086. She saw that Mo Jingshan was reading an English summary in a business magazine and was not looking at his phone. She glanced at the words on the screen and her eyes moved. She reached out to take his phone. 136x times x times x. Brother Jingshan, please don't be angry at my sister. I didn't think that she would really use such methods to drug you 2 nights ago. Originally, she wanted to send you to another woman's bed. I persuaded her for a long time, but she wouldn't listen. If the two of you continue tormenting each other like this, will there really be a good ending? My heart aches for my sister, and I feel even more sorry for Brother Jingshan. After reading this message, Jinwan raised her pretty brows. Your phone number, do a lot of people know it? Jinwan raised her eyes. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, casually placing the magazine in his hands to the side. A lot of people? Who are you referring to? Jinwan remembered that not many people knew Mo Jingshan's private number, and he would not easily reveal it to others. I just didn't think that Meng Ran would care so much about our relationship. Because of my matters, she would often send you messages. Jinwan smiled, but she deliberately added a hint of jealousy in her eyes. Mo Jingshan watched her secretly stifled expression and asked, weren't you the one who gave my number to her? It seemed like there really was such a thing. Ji Meng Ran often played with her phone. When exactly did she secretly remember Mo Jingshan's private number? Jinwan did not pay much attention to it. She would send it, but it doesn't mean that I would read it, Mo Jingshan said mildly. Hearing this, Jinwan subconsciously scrolled down and found that there were more than 10 unread messages. Aside from a few messages from the company, there were indeed many messages from Ji Meng Ran, but they were all unread. She casually opened a few of them. The contents of the messages were all about her playing the role of a good younger sister. On the surface, she was speaking up for her older sister with good intentions, but in reality she was described as unreasonable and even strange. As expected, she was extremely ambitious. Mo Jingshan calmly said when she suddenly fell silent, being young doesn't mean you're innocent. Family cannot represent complete trust. It's not necessarily a bad thing for you to see things clearly early. Jin Wan suspiciously stared at the man in front of her who seemed to have seen through everything. No wonder Mo Jingshan rarely returned when Ji Mengran came to stay. It was likely that he had long seen through Ji Mengran's unruly thoughts. She really should have slapped herself awake 10 years ago. How could her heart be so big? Jin Wan harshly slapped her head twice. In the end, she slapped the area where she had bumped into last night. She immediately cried out, and her entire face scrunched up in pain. Mo Jingshan stood up and walked over, tugging her hand away. Seeing that her forehead was still slightly swollen, his brows furrowed silently. Isn't it painful enough? Must you only stop when you're injured further? Jin Wan raised her head. The pain was so intense that tears were about to come out. She then glanced at his stern expression and revealed a remorseful expression. I won't let anyone casually stay in the Yew Garden anymore. Did I cause trouble for you previously? Chapter 8. Everything that had to do with her was not troublesome. Jin Wan's heart rippled as she threw herself into his embrace. After being pounced on by her twice in the morning, Mo Jingshan could be considered to have gotten used to her sudden sweetness and passion. He lowered his eyes to look at her small head rubbing against his chest and caressed it. If you're full, return to your room to rest. It's already autumn. Don't catch a cold. Sleep after eating. Do you think I'm a pig? Jin Wan's face rubbed against his chest. She suddenly noticed that the surrounding helpers were all bashful and awkward. She immediately withdrew from his embrace, only to see that Mo Jingshan was looking down at her with a faint smile that was difficult to understand. Weren't you always like this in the past? I was. In the past, Jin Wan would eat breakfast with him like she had no choice. She would finish it quickly and then find an excuse to return to her room to rest. She was not willing to spend even a minute more with him. I didn't sleep well recently. When I woke up in the morning I went back to sleep, that's all. Jin Wan poked her own face as she explained. You see, only good sleep can have good skin. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly at her awkward explanation. He did not refute her obvious sophistry. Seeing that he did not believe her, she directly grabbed his hand and pressed it against her face. If you don't believe me, touch it. Isn't it smooth and tender? Mo Jingshan's warm fingertips caressed her face. Jin Wan tugged on his hand but was unable to control his fingers' movements. Instead, her chin was pinched by him. Her face immediately heated up as she watched the man who suddenly leaned closer. It's indeed smooth and tender. His voice was slightly husky. He used a voice that only she could hear to describe it. These words were originally used to describe her own face. However, when they came out of his mouth so softly, no matter how she heard it, it seemed to have some other meaning that made her face blush and her heart beat faster. Mrs. Mo, you're seducing me so directly. Do you not want me to go to the company? Mo Jingshan's voice was pressed against her lips. He was only a finger's distance away from kissing her. Jin Wan's heart instantly skipped a beat. How could he be so seductive? How could Mo Jingshan be so seductive? Her brain must have been flooded with water in her previous life to have kept him at arm's length. Who said that an aloof and indifferent career man must be inflexible and boring when it comes to marriage and relationships? He was clearly teasing her to death. Jin Wan closed her eyes, but after waiting for a long time, the kiss she expected did not fall. When she opened her eyes again, she saw that Mo Jingshan was staring at her. He had always been calm and self-restrained. He kept himself aloof from others and had always been good at reading people. Jin Wan's sudden change in personality and her sudden initiative, although he did not ask, did not mean that her sudden change did not exist. Jin Wan paused for a moment, wondering if she had been too impatient. She instinctively took a step back. Just as she was about to walk away from him, her waist was suddenly pulled back by his strong arm. Her lips were sealed by him. The servants had taken away the cutlery on the table. There was no one around. It was so quiet that they could only hear each other's breathing. Jin Wan raised her hands to hold his neck tightly, her eyes filled with tears. He closed his eyes. There was no way to look. If he continued to look, the company's executive meeting would most likely be delayed until tomorrow. This little woman's body was filled with an innate, cold fragrance. Bit by bit it tempted him. Even if it was just a kiss, he wanted to tear her apart. Auntie Chin kept all the blankets in the guest room. When she walked downstairs, she saw Jin Wan sitting on the sofa with a flushed face. Her expression was as though her soul had been stolen. At this moment, the doorbell rang outside the Yew Garden. Mo Jingshan had just received a call from the company and was about to leave. He went to open the door. The moment he opened the door, he saw Ji Minggran standing outside. Ji Minggran wore a light-colored dress and had light makeup suitable for her age. The moment she saw that it was Mo Jingshin who had personally opened the door, her eyes brightened. "Brother Jingshin. Usually by this time you would have already left for the company. Why haven't you left today?" Ji Minggran's face was filled with joy. Some time ago, Ji Minggran had wanted to use the excuse of comforting Mo Jingshin to look for him. However, he had always been in the company, and Mo Corporation's management was strict. She had no way of entering. 2 nights ago, she had only taken a quick glance at the Yew Garden. That night, he had directly pulled Jinwan back to their room. It had been a long time since she had seen him so closely. Suddenly seeing him open the door, she was pleasantly surprised. Mo Jingshin's figure was tall and straight. He blocked the door and did not have any intention of letting her in. Ji Minggran glanced inside. From this angle she did not see Jinwan's figure. She softly said, "Is my sister still sleeping?" She locks herself in her room all day and refuses to meet anyone. No wonder her personality is becoming more and more strange. I'll find some time to persuade her. Since she dared to say this, she naturally had her own plans. In any case, there was already a barrier between Jinwan and Mo Jingshin. Although she did not know why he had returned to the Yew Garden last night, it was likely not peaceful here. Jinwan must have quarreled with him again. "You're here so early?" Mo Jingshin's tone was mild and expressionless. There was no warmth in his voice either. Ji Minggran was long used to his coldness. Furthermore, it was likely that they were not happy last night. She kindly smiled. "I was afraid that sister's mood was not good these 2 days and would throw a tantrum or do something unreasonable, so I wanted to come early to accompany her." "What unreasonable things have I done?" Jinwan's voice suddenly came from inside. Ji Minggran's expression instantly froze. Jinwan walked to Mo Jingshin's side. Her hand naturally wrapped around his arm, her smile deep. "Apart from my bad temper some time ago, what other unreasonable things have I done? Are they worthy of you mentioning them?" Ji Minggran's expression was slightly dazed as she stared at Jinwan. She then looked at her and Mo Jingshin's linked hands. After what happened 2 nights ago, Mo Jingshin was already completely disappointed in Jinwan. "How could it be, you and brother Jingshin?" Ji Minggran spoke with some uncertainty. Jinwan directly interrupted her words. "Minggran, I've already been married for so long. Why haven't you changed your way of addressing me? He's your brother-in-law. You can't call him brother Jingshin anymore." Ji Minggran's expression was slightly heavy as she watched this scene. She took a deep breath and suddenly turned to ask, "Brother Jingshin, did you do something to my sister? In the past she avoided you like the plague. Every time you touched her she would take 8 to 10 showers. Why would she suddenly become so close to you?" Jinwan leaned against Mo Jingshin's side, speaking with a teasing expression. "Then won't she shed her skin? This sister of mine is indeed still young. Her words are always so impolite. It's so exaggerated that it makes one want to laugh." Mo Jingshin glanced at her. "No wonder it's so smooth and tender. It turns out that she has to take 8 to 10 showers a day." Chapter 9. Jinwan did not expect Mo Jingshin to have the potential to act coquettishly on the outside. She could not help but secretly glance at him. The interaction between the two of them was not obvious, but it was clear that they were not hiding anything. Ji Minggran's voice immediately became sharp. "Big sister, what are you doing? Why are you exchanging glances? I'm still standing here. What else can we do? It's not like we're doing anything too intimate. We're just exchanging glances. Do we need your permission?" Jinwan leaned her head on Mo Jingshin's shoulder, smiling lazily at his handsome face under the sunlight. "Hubby, it's already past 8. If we don't go to the company now, will it affect the meeting in the morning?" Ji Minggran's eyes were about to pop out. "Hubby?" She actually called him hubby? Jinwan had always wished for no one to know she was married. Not only did she not allow anyone to call her Mrs. Mo, she also hated it when people linked her name with Mo Jingshin. She had never acknowledged this marriage. But she actually called him hubby? What did this mean? Ji Minggran was confused. She was stunned for a long time, but her heart was already on guard. If this continued, how could she have the chance to snatch him away? Mo Jingshin glanced at the time. There was indeed an important meeting in the company today, but the little woman by his side calling him hubby really made him have the rare thought of, from now on, the monarch won't have morning court. He chuckled lightly, his eyes filled with warmth that belonged solely to Jinwan. He rubbed her head. "You guys chat. I'm going to the company." This action almost caused Ji Minggran to explode. She endured it for a long time before maintaining the smile on her face. Brother Jingshen, I've just arrived and you're already in a rush to leave? Your brother-in-law has things to do in the company. Could it be that he's going to delay the meeting just to chat with you? Jinwan glanced at her meaningfully. I didn't mean it that way, It was rare for Ji Mingran to be rendered speechless by Jinwan's words. In the past, no matter what she said, Jinwan would always give in and never refute. Why was it that today she felt like she was being controlled? Mo Jingshin casually adjusted his sleeves and accepted the suit jacket that the helper handed over. He did not even look at Ji Mingran. You're wearing so little. Don't stand at the door for too long, huh? Mo Jingshin said gently by Jinwan's side. Under Jinwan's smiling gaze, he stepped out of the door into the cool breeze and bright sun. Seeing him leave, Ji Mingran instinctively turned to follow him. She suspected that Jinwan had said something to him in the past 2 days. Otherwise, even if Mo Jingshin didn't pay much attention to her due to his relationship with Jinwan, he would at least say a few words to her. However, today she felt uneasy. Before he could follow, Jinwan suddenly grabbed his hand. Mingran, I have something to tell you. Jinwan acted as though she did not see her anxious expression. Ji Mingran was suddenly held back and was slightly annoyed. She turned back but saw that Jinwan's gaze was cold and indifferent. She instantly calmed down. I see that Brother Jingshin's mood is quite good today. Why don't you take advantage of his good mood to make things clear? If you have a good attitude and calmly and rationally express that you don't want to be with him, perhaps your divorce will come naturally. Whether we divorce or not, you always seem to be more anxious than me. Jinwan stared at her. Ji Mingran's expression instantly changed. What do you mean by that? Haven't you always been the one who fought so hard to get a divorce? Back then, when you married Brother Jingshin, it was Dad who forced you to marry into the Mo family. You never agreed. If you didn't like to go against Dad since young, he wouldn't have been so angry as to disregard your wishes and marry you off. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to get over it, so I often came to talk to you to relieve your boredom. Seeing that you were in so much pain, I racked my brains to come up with ideas for you so that you could get a divorce and regain your freedom as soon as possible. Could it be that I did something wrong? If she had not been reborn into this life, Jinwan would have really believed these words. After experiencing 2 lives, she finally understood how deep Ji Mingran's pretense was. Of course you didn't do anything wrong. Right now, Mo Jingshin and I have a rare harmonious relationship. If we can really be together, of course it's better than getting a divorce. Jinwan's voice was quiet, but it did not allow anyone to question her stance. Ji Mingran was silent for a few seconds. Her voice was somewhat strange as she asked, You're not getting a divorce? Jinwan curved her lips. Mo Jingshin is good in every aspect, whether it's his family background, ability, appearance, or character. There are also many women who like him. Why must I push away such a good person like him and make way for those women? Aren't you thinking too much? Ji Mingran's expression was slightly guilty. If you don't consider the fact that Mo Jingshin is your brother-in-law, don't you like a man like him? Jinwan continued to look into her eyes. Big sister. What are you saying? Ji Mingran's heart instantly skipped a beat. Her eyes were filled with a trace of panic. It's just a joke. Why are you panicking? I'm not panicking. I'm just very, very surprised. Actually, this is also good. Ji Mingran's tone was stuttering. She forced out a smile, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not see any happiness in her expression. Otherwise, Dad's heart will always ache from anger because of your divorce. Otherwise, I'll always be worried that you won't be able to get over it. You don't have to worry. You also don't have to go through so much trouble to come to the Yew Garden to accompany me. Jinwan said as she turned back to look inside. She raised her voice to say, I've already asked someone to clean up the guest room. I'll arrange your things and have someone send them back tomorrow. Ji Mingran opened her mouth. Her eyes were filled with surprise, but she could not say a single word. Chapter 10. Walking out of the Yew Garden, Ji Mingran's heart was still filled with doubts. Could it be that the night before, when Mo Jingshin was drugged, she had purposely worn too little to arouse Jinwan's suspicions? Otherwise, how could her attitude have changed so much? She glanced around. Thinking that Mo Jingshin's car should not have gone far, she picked up her phone to call him. Anyway, she did not drive here this time, and the Ji home was on the way to the Mo Corporation building. If she asked Mo Jingshin to send her home, he would most likely agree. If she had the chance to sit in his car, she must have a good chat with him about Jinwan. The phone rang for a long time without being picked up. Ji Mingran did not give up and continued to call. Suddenly she heard a phone ring behind her. She turned around in shock, only to see Jinwan walking out with Mo Jingshan's pure black phone. That phone was actually in Jinwan's hands. Ji Mingran's expression was indescribably wonderful. Seeing her stiffly standing there, Jinwan casually said, "It's likely that your brother-in-law was too busy at the company today. When he left, he did not even bring this phone with him. Thankfully he had another phone. Otherwise I would have had to contact Assistant Shen to retrieve it." Seeing the faint, cold smile in Jinwan's eyes, Ji Mingran inexplicably felt a chill down her spine. "Was it you who called earlier?" "No." Ji Mingran stood outside the Yu Garden's door, at a loss as to what to do. "Wasn't it?" Jinwan glanced at the missed call on her cell phone. "Although this number isn't saved, this string of numbers is very familiar to me. Did you call the wrong number earlier?" It turned out that Mo Jingshan did not even save her phone number in his contact list. Ji Mingran's heart sank, her face turning pale. "Earlier I really might have called the wrong number." While speaking, Ji Mingran did not linger and rushed out. She was not even willing to explain further, afraid that she would make more mistakes. Jinwan planned to ask Auntie Chin to help her find all the wedding photos she had kept when she suddenly received a call from the hospital. She hurriedly drove all the way to Haicheng Central Hospital. The door to the orthopedic single-person ward suddenly opened, and a tall male doctor in a white coat walked out. The male doctor was wearing a surgical mask, revealing only his eyes and brows. However, this did not prevent Jinwan from recognizing him at a glance. She didn't say anything. The other party's gaze swept past her face coldly and expressionlessly. "Nuanyuan, are you the one who came? Ouch, I'm going to die of pain." Inside, the young girl lying on the hospital bed screamed miserably. This was Jinwan's best and most important friend, Xia Tian. Seeing her face when she walked in, Xia Tian couldn't help but roll her eyes. "What's with that expression? I only got into a car accident and broke my leg. I'm not dead." Seeing Jinwan's expression, Xia Tian pursed her lips and said, "Where's the KFC I asked you to buy for me?" He hadn't eaten for a whole day, so he was hungry and uncomfortable. "The doctor also wants me to drink bone soup with less salt and less oil from today onwards." "Aren't you trying to kill me? People like me who hate drinking soup the most actually let me drink it every day." She lowered her head to see that Jinwan's hands were empty. "Damn. No way. He actually came empty-handed?" "Didn't she come empty-handed?" Earlier on, when she received the call, Jinwan almost dropped her phone. The person who had died in front of her covered in blood suddenly said on the phone that she had gotten into a car accident and wanted her to buy a family bucket to send to the hospital. At that time, Jinwan's mind did not have any KFC or family bucket. When she was driving, she had exceeded the speed limit the entire time and had almost flown over. Xia Tian was still alive. Right now, she was not together with the scumbag who had ruined her life. "Your leg is injured to this extent. Don't eat those messy things anymore." Jinwan calmed her emotions and pulled over a chair to sit by the bed. "There's a century-old bone soup restaurant nearby. The taste is really good. I'll go buy it for you later." Xia Tian's lips twitched. "Tiske. Without KFC, what use do I have for you?" Jinwan did not argue with her. She sat by the side and watched her. It was rare for Xia Tian to see Jinwan so quiet and obedient. "I say, have you been seeking death in front of Mo Jingshan recently? I've already told you, don't get too close to that sister of yours. She doesn't have any good intentions. Mo Jingshan has already treated you well enough. How much longer do you want to leave him hanging?" These words of advice that she had not heard for a long time once again rang by her ears. Jinwan's nose felt slightly sour as she smiled. I know what I'm doing." She couldn't tell Xia Tian about her rebirth, but she definitely didn't want to see her best friend repeat the same mistake. "Xia Tian, after you leave the hospital, don't ever have any contact with the man who hit you with a car. Even if he wants to compensate you in person, you are not allowed to see him. Do you remember? This car accident had happened before in her previous life. It was also this car accident that allowed Xia Tian to meet the man who had ruined her life." "What do you mean by what? What do you mean by what?" Xia Tian completely did not take the latter half of Jinwan's words to heart. "What's so bad about Mo Jingshan? How many women can't wait to climb into his bed? Only you, Jinwan, are so stubborn." All right. I'm the one who's stubborn. I was wrong in the past. Look. Every time I mention Mo Jingshan, you become impatient." Xia Tian harumphed. "My good intentions are treated as ill intent by you. I'm going to die from anger." Jinwan did not speak. She only forcefully tugged on Xia Tian's hand, holding it tightly. However, Xia Tian's expression was one of disgust. Why are you holding it so tightly? Could it be that you've been brainwashed by your sister to the point that you're no longer interested in men and are now interested in women? Damn, I don't want to be a lesbian. You let go of my hand. Not only did Jinwan want to hold her hand, she even wanted to hug her properly. Hug her tightly. It's your father's birthday next month. Do you want to take this opportunity to return to the Xia family in S City and build up some ties with them? Jinwan suddenly said. She had to think of a way to prevent Xia Tian from meeting that scumbag in High City in a month's time, even if she had to return to the family she hated the most. She definitely could not watch her get pregnant, miscarry, break her heart, and send herself to death because of that bastard. I'm not going back. Xia Tian did not wish to mention anything about her family. She immediately put on a wronged expression. Nuan, then I don't want the family bucket. Can't I just eat 2 pairs of chicken wings? No. Jinwan knew that she was hungry. She stood up. Lie down obediently and don't move. I'll go buy bone soup for you. Can I just eat 1 pair of chicken wings? No. Which one? No. The door opened and closed. Jinwan did not even turn her head. Xia Tian sighed in despair. I'm really careless in making friends. You don't even know how to feel for me? All of a sudden, the door to the ward was opened again. Jinwan's voice came from outside. Original flavor chicken nuggets, the non-spicy kind. Want some? Chapter 11. The sky gradually darkened. Jinwan held onto her newly bought thermos, which was filled with fragrant bone soup, and walked back to the hospital. The street lights were just beginning to turn on, and a limited edition black ghost drove by. Shenmu glanced outside and suddenly asked in surprise, "Xiaomo, isn't that Miss Ji?" Mo Jingshan's gaze moved away from the documents in his hands. His deep, black eyes abruptly turned in the direction Shenmu was pointing. By the time Jinwan left the hospital, it was already 8 at night. Just as she was about to walk to the opposite parking lot, she caught a glimpse of a luxury brand from the corner of her eyes. The dark gray shirt in the display window was very beautiful. It looked like a classic male clothing from a certain high-end brand in France. Even if it was placed 10 years later, it would definitely not go out of style. The color was also extremely stable and low-key. If it was worn by Mo Jingshan, it would definitely suit him well. Furthermore, she seemed to have never bought anything for Mo Jingshan. Not to mention the shirt, even the wedding ring was chosen by the Mo family's elders. She did not even take a second look at it. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that she had mistreated him for too long. Jinwan directly entered the store. As soon as she walked in, the shop assistant inside saw her clothes and immediately greeted her with sparkling eyes. Welcome, Mississippi. Would you like to choose a shirt or a suit? Are you buying it for your boyfriend? The shop assistant asked enthusiastically. A shirt. Jinwan spoke and turned toward the display window. She looked at the shirt that she had taken a liking to when she was outside. The shop assistant followed behind. Your eyes are really good. This is a new style that you brought back from Paris yesterday afternoon. This shirt is made of 300 super high-count high-density fabric. It feels soft and comfortable to the touch. It's the best among shirt fabrics. Furthermore, a man and a woman suddenly walked out of the changing room. They had just tried on the clothes and were about to pay the bill. The tall, alluring woman turned back and saw Jinwan. Yo, isn't this Miss Ji? Hearing that voice, Jinwan turned around. The man by the woman's side also turned back in surprise. Seeing the two of them, Jinwan indifferently shifted her gaze away, speaking to the shop assistant. I'll take this one. The size has to be 1/8. It can be worn by a man with a standard figure. Please help me check the size carefully. Don't take the wrong one. All right. The shop assistant happily turned around to open the list. Jinwan's gaze wandered around, trying to find a suitable tie to match. The woman, who had been completely ignored, rolled her eyes. You're really good at pretending. She pretended to be a high and mighty young lady on the outside, but she was actually an illegitimate daughter. Moreover, she's an illegitimate daughter. With that, the woman turned around and looked at the man behind her who was coldly raising his eyebrows. Right? Tian Yuan? Back then, the Ji family almost had a marriage alliance with your Han family. In the end, it was Uncle Han who had the foresight to refuse to let you marry an illegitimate daughter. Otherwise, this eldest Miss Ji would be your wife now. Han Tianyuan was a famous dissolute young master in Haichen. In the past, he had indeed drooled over Jinwan's appearance and figure. However, Jinwan had never given him any face. She was arrogant and stubborn, causing him to lose face many times. As a result, this young master's fondness for Jinwan gradually turned into something against her. Ever since Jinwan got married, he took pleasure in hearing about this Miss G's scandals. The woman continued to chatter on. Also, the Mo family has been involved in business and politics for generations. Regardless of whether it's power or reputation, they are definitely among the best in the country. How could they be so blind as to marry an illegitimate daughter? Han Tianyuan rarely had the chance to mock Jinwan. He immediately sneered. That's right. If it weren't for Elder Mo's insistence and the Ji family's desire to hug onto the Mo family's thigh, someone like her would not even be able to enter the Mo family's door. I heard that this Jinwan has never appeared with Mo Jingshan after getting married for so long. It's likely that she has long been thrown into the cold palace, right? She's only Mrs. Mo in name? The woman purposely looked over mockingly as she laughed. Mississippi, the employee was worried that Jinwan's mood would be affected and leave. The order would then fly away. She rushed to wrap up the shirt and walked over. The shirt has already been packed for you. Would you like to pay by card or bill? From start to finish, Jinwan did not even look at the two of them. Before she could speak, the woman suddenly leaned over. Miss G is really generous. A shirt like this costs 160,000 yuan. Can you afford it? Jinwan finally glanced at her and calmly said, It turns out that even an idiot isn't completely stupid. You can even clearly count the number of zeros behind the price tag. She had some impression of this woman. Her name was Zhou Yanyan. Her family background was not bad, and her personality was even more condescending than before. She did not know where she found out about the Ji family's secrets. She often went around spreading the news that Jinwan was an illegitimate daughter. Of course, Jinwan was not an illegitimate daughter. However, the Ji family did not only have her and Ji Menggran, these two daughters. Those were all done by her father when he was young. Everyone in the Ji family had long kept their mouths shut about these matters. No one dared to mention it. Zhou Yanyan, who was scolded as an idiot, glared at her for a moment before opening her mouth to mock. Are you sure this card can be used? Didn't you have all your cards frozen before you married into the Mo family? Do you need me and young Master Han to help you buy it? It's only 160,000 yuan. Miss G, you don't have to be so polite with us. Jinwan's expression did not change, but her heart sank. She had indeed forgotten about this matter. Back then, in order to prevent her from escaping the marriage, her father had ruthlessly frozen all the cards under her name. The great Miss G, after getting married, has become the Ji family's spilled water. Not only have all the assets under your name been frozen, even your cards can't be used. If word of this gets out, I'm afraid people will laugh their heads off. Zhou Yanyan's voice grew louder and louder, afraid that others would not know that the young miss of the Ji family could not even afford 160,000 yuan. By the side, Han Tianyuan also mocked. It seems like you really don't have money? If Miss G isn't too happy after marriage, I won't care about your married status. How about this? I'll help you pay for this and you sleep with me for a night. How about it? What are you saying? Are you treating me like I don't exist? Zhou Yanyan's previously proud expression disappeared. She immediately glared at him unhappily. Han Tianyuan still had a sloppy expression. Do you think this lord's money is something that the wind blows? It's fine if I don't sleep. It's fine if I let her sleep with my brothers for a night. 160,000 yuan per night. I'm afraid Miss G is the most expensive in Haicheng. Zhou Yanyan instantly laughed out loud. Her eyes were filled with excitement. Right. This deal isn't bad. How about Miss G? Do you need us to help you pay? With the two of you speaking in such a manner, those who don't know would think that the two of you are acting as a double act. Jinwan did not get angry and instead smiled. Looking at your temperament, it is indeed suitable to act as a monkey on stage. Zhou Yanyan proudly raised her eyelids. What's the use of putting on such a noble and virtuous attitude? Do you really think that just because you're an illegitimate daughter, you can transform from a sparrow to a phoenix? If not for the Ji family's halo protecting you, who knows which brothel you'd be screaming in right now? When Jinwan heard these words, her smile was lazy and casual. She slowly dragged out her tone. Miss Zhou, when you were 15 you dropped out of middle school and stayed at home. You fooled around in various bars and slept with countless men. Tell me, without the halo of the surname Zhou, the one crying out in a brothel right now, would it be you or me? Chapter 12. Zhou Yanyan wanted to scold back but was momentarily choked. Although this Jinwan had the temper of a rich young lady, the Ji family had sent her overseas a long time ago. Even if Jinwan was currently just an idler who did nothing at home, it was not fake that she had received several degrees and awards in America when she was in her teens. In the end, aren't you just a piece of trash who needs to rely on the Ji family's card to survive? Zhou Yanyan arrogantly scolded, "Don't stray too far from the topic with me. Just tell me if you can afford this shirt right now. If you can't afford it, then quickly admit defeat." This luxurious store was located in a very conspicuous location in a bustling area. There were already many onlookers standing both inside and outside the door. Jinwan was neither shocked nor flustered. The more people there were, the brighter the smile in her eyes became. Han Tianyuan's eyelids twitched as he watched from the side. He had a strange feeling that something was wrong. He felt that there was something different about Jinwan. If it was in the past, this Ji family's young lady would have mercilessly smashed the bag in her hands onto Zhou Yanyan's head, not caring about anything else. Yet, right now she was still standing there, calm and unhurried, as though she had changed into a different person. "Miss Zhou, the moment you open your mouth you're already so rich. If I don't give you face, then wouldn't it seem like I'm too arrogant?" Jinwan smiled meaningfully. Zhou Yanyan felt that there was a hidden meaning behind her words and cautiously furrowed her brows. Jinwan directly placed the shirt in her hands onto the counter by the side. She played with the card in her hands that indeed did not have much money, and unhurriedly said, "Before you hooked up with young Master Han, you had just swindled 100 million yuan from another man. This mere 160,000 yuan is indeed a drop in the ocean in your eyes. Since you insist on paying for me, then I won't snatch away Miss Zhou's limelight. What nonsense are you spouting? What 100 million yuan?" Zhou Yanyan's gaze flickered, and a chill ran down her spine. Young Master Han will definitely be interested in what I'm going to say next. Jinwan glanced at Han Tianyuan, whose brows were immediately furrowed. "Miss Zhou hooked up with a married man, who was the financial director of your Han Corporation. She and this financial director took advantage of a financial loophole and cashed out hundreds of millions in cash. After that, he abandoned his wife and children and fled the country with Miss Zhou. However, the arrogant Miss Zhou only had eyes for the money in his hands. She threatened and lured him out of 100 million. Jinwan's voice was gentle and slow, but each word was clear. Zhou Yanyan's heart jumped as she listened. At this moment, Han Tianyuan's expression was no longer that simple. Their family's company had inexplicably disappeared a few months ago. Up until now they still hadn't found out the truth. Could it really be related to Zhou Yanyan? Thinking about it carefully, ever since Zhou Yanyan had climbed into his bed, she had often casually asked him about the progress of the financial loophole case. Seeing Han Tianyuan's expression change, Zhou Yanyan panicked and hurriedly turned around to explain to him, "Don't listen to her nonsense. Our Zhou family doesn't lack money. I might do something illegal like this." "Don't lack money? Then why is Miss Zhou suddenly hugging onto the Han family's thigh? I remember a long time ago, I heard from a good friend of yours that you have no interest in weaklings like young Master Han who don't even know how to fight?" Han Tianyuan's expression darkened. "Young Master Han, I suggest that you investigate carefully. Did the Zhou family have a shortage of funds and then suddenly receive a 100 million in funds? Furthermore, the source of the money is unknown. Let the police investigate the Zhou family. The final result will definitely satisfy you, young Master Han." "Shut up, you're spouting nonsense." Zhou Yanyan did not expect that such a deeply hidden matter would be found out by Jinwan, who never bothered with other people's business. She was so anxious that she wanted to tear her mouth apart. There was no way anyone would know about this matter. But Jinwan could even pinpoint the time so accurately. How was that possible? Seeing Zhou Yanyan's expression as though she had seen a ghost, Jinwan could only smile. She had 10 more years of memories than them. Back then, this huge business case was finally solved after a few years. It had once caused a stir in Haicheng. It was hard for her not to know about it. Originally, she did not intend to use such a method. After all, she would feel that she had an unfair advantage. To deal with these two people, there were actually many other methods. However, it was not in Jinwan's character to stand here and suffer losses for nothing. In her previous life, she had failed because of the person closest to her. She had made one mistake after another, but that did not mean she was weak to the point where she could be stepped on by a woman like Zhou Yanyan. "I didn't do it. Jinwan is slandering me. She must have been agitated by the Mo family's cold treatment. Which eye of yours saw me being ignored in the Mo family?" Zhou Yanyan immediately turned around and angrily said, "You've already been married to Mo Jingshan for half a year. Have the two of you ever appeared together?" Even in the photos taken by the media, you and Mo Jingshan have never been in the same frame. The more Zhou Yanyan spoke, the more agitated she became. She was so angry that she dared to spit out any words. Right now in Haiqing, who doesn't know that you, Jinwan, are Mrs. Mo in name but not in reality? Mo Jingshan does not even treat you seriously. I think it won't be long before you are chased out of the house. Is that so? Chapter 13. Jinwan turned around and was shocked to see Mo Jingshan's cold and tall figure walking in from the door. Why would he appear here? The surrounding people were all stunned. They could only see that the newcomer's figure was tall and straight. It was as though he had arrived with the autumn wind. His cold, black eyes were filled with a sharpness that caused one to feel fear. It was as though he was a stern god that had appeared from nowhere. The moment Zhou Yanyan and Han Tianyuan turned around and saw Mo Jingshan, their faces were filled with fear. The ordinary people here might not recognize Mo Jingshan's true appearance, but how could the two of them not recognize him? Mo Jingshan's cold, black eyes swept past Zhou Yanyan's direction and quickly landed on Jinwan. He saw the shirt placed on the counter by her hand. Mrs. Mo will be chased out? Why don't I know about this? He calmly spoke. His voice was low and did not sound sharp, but it caused the temperature of the entire shop to instantly drop. Zhou Yanyan's gaze trembled. Mo, why are you here? Mo Jingshan did not look at her. He walked toward Jinwan. The employees by her side unconsciously moved to the side. Jinwan did not know why he would appear, but her heart felt much more at ease because of him. As he approached, she raised her eyes to smile at him. I'm fine. You don't have to stand up for me. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear anything. He held her hand, placing it in his palm. This action was silent yet firm. Mo, this is all a misunderstanding. The moment Han Tianyuan saw Mo Jingshan, he instantly cowered. No matter how powerful the Han family was, they could not match up to the Mo family. If they were to offend Mo Jingshan over such a small matter when he returned tonight, his parents would most likely break his legs. However, Mo Jingshan did not even look at him, directly skipping over his useless words. His voice was clear and cold as he replied, Why am I here? Do I need to explain myself to you if I accompany my wife to go shopping? Zhou Yanyan, who was standing by the side, instantly choked. Accompany Jinwan to go shopping? Who did not know that Mo Jingshan was a high mountain flower that others could only look up to? How could someone like him have the leisure to accompany Jinwan to go shopping? Right now, Han Tianyuan already had a grudge against Zhou Yanyan who was beside him. Right now he only wanted to protect himself. Mo, this is a quarrel between women. I really cannot stop them. You see, this matter is really... Don't women need to use their brains to argue? Mo Jingshan picked up the shirt by Jinwan's side. His gaze was cold and his tone was mild. Can't you tell that she specially bought this shirt for me? Mrs. Mo has been neglected and is about to be kicked out of the house. How can you come up with such a lie? Zhou Yanyan's face gradually paled. Although she saw Jinwan buying a shirt earlier, she did not expect it to be for Mo Jingshan. How could this be? Rumor had it that Jinwan and Mo Jingshan were estranged. Mo Jingshan glanced at the card in Jinwan's hand and casually said, How many times have I told you to remember to bring your card when you go out? I've spoiled you too much. You don't bring anything when you go shopping. Do you think everywhere is the Yu Garden? A black card suddenly fell from Mo Jingshan's hand into Jinwan's. Jinwan was not stupid and quickly cooperated with him. I was in a hurry before leaving the house and forgot. Don't forget it next time. Mo Jingshan's hand gently rubbed her head, as though he was coaxing a child who always forgot things, yet he doted on her to the point of death. The surrounding onlookers were forcefully fed a large mouthful of dog food. Regardless of whether they were married or unmarried, they all held onto their hearts, their eyes filled with envy and jealousy. Jinwan held the card in her hand. It was a high-class black card with no limit. In fact, it was not that Mo Jingshan had never given her a card before. Even when they had just gotten married, he had already given her everything he could. It was just that at that time she refused to be with him no matter what. Even if the Ji family froze everything, she was determined to draw a clear line between them. Aside from staying in the Yu Garden, she was not willing to spend a single cent of his money. Mo. That Han Tianyuan fearlessly walked over, wanting to continue explaining. The moment he approached, Jinwan saw the coldness in Mo Jingshan's calm eyes. It was likely that Mo Jingshan had heard the entire conversation. She hurriedly and stealthily pinched his finger. No matter how powerful the Mo family was, The Han family's connections in Haicheng were not simple. It was just a dispute caused by Zhou Yanyan. There was no need for Mo Jingshan to become enemies with the Han family. She did not want to cause him any unnecessary trouble, even if this trouble was nothing to him. It was fine if she caused some trouble, but she did not want Mo Jingshan to lower his status to have any connections with such a person. It was not worth it. Furthermore, it would dirty his hands. Jinwan hurriedly leaned into his embrace, softly saying, "I'm hungry. I want to go eat something." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. It was rare for Jinwan to choose to keep the peace so quickly. Although this was indeed the most appropriate method, he would naturally have a way to resolve this matter. He would not let her suffer for nothing, nor would he cause any disagreements between the two families on the surface. But Jinwan's change? What exactly was the reason for her change? Zhou Yanyan had already begun to secretly try to escape. Han Tianyuan saw it. The 200 million yuan issue had not been resolved. Regardless of whether it was true or false, he could not let her run away. He reached out to grab her back. "Ah, what are you doing?" Zhou Yanyan turned back to see him. She was frightened into softly begging, "Let go of me. You want to run after causing trouble? Don't tell me you're really related to that matter?" Han Tianyuan softly cursed, dragging this idiot back. Zhou Yanyan's legs were slightly soft. She did not dare to speak. Jinwan gently tugged on the corner of Mo Jingshan's clothes. "There are too many people here. The air is not good." Her meaning was that she wanted to leave now. Mo Jingshan held her hand, staring at her for a moment. His voice did not carry any warmth. "Apologize." Han Tianyuan and Zhou Yanyan's expressions froze. These two words were clearly directed at them. He wanted them to apologize? And in front of so many people? Han Tianyuan glanced at the crowd that had yet to disperse. More and more people had gathered. He was the great young master of the Han family. Something like apologizing in front of everyone. Zhou Yanyan was also slightly embarrassed. However, no matter how important face was, the Mo Jingshan in front of her could not be offended. "Xiao Mo." Zhou Yanyan wanted to quickly escape from this dangerous situation. She accepted her fate and said, "I'm sorry. The words I said today were all randomly overheard from the media." Mo Jingshan's cold gaze swept past her face. It was extremely harsh. "Are you apologizing to me?" Zhou Yanyan's body trembled under his cold gaze. Her eyes reddened, and she unwillingly turned to look at Jinwan. Miss G, I'm sorry." Chapter 14. Zhou Yanyan immediately raised her eyes to glare at her. However, under Mo Jingshan's cold gaze, she immediately surrendered. Her lips trembled as she cried, "Miss G, I'm sorry." "I still didn't hear you clearly." Jinwan smiled innocently. "Sorry, Miss G. I was wrong." This time Jinwan simply didn't speak. Zhou Yan gritted her teeth and took a deep breath. Ignoring the crowd of onlookers, she suddenly yelled at the top of her voice, "Miss G. I'm sorry." Jinwan's gaze remained cold. She suddenly glanced at the male clothing that Han Tianyuan was trying on earlier. "The one that young Master Han is wearing shouldn't be cheap. Why don't I buy it for you?" Zhou Yanyan seemed to know what Jinwan would say next, and her expression instantly paled. "I'll pay. There's no need for you to accompany anyone to sleep for a night. Miss Zhou only needs to go to Haitian Square tonight and dance a few hours of pole dance in a bikini. I heard that Miss Zhou is very good at pole dancing." Jinwan curved her lips in a lazy and charming smile. Zhou Yanyan felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. "What? You don't want to jump?" Jinwan turned to look at the onlookers outside the door. "Why don't I pick a man from these passers-by and let you sleep with him for a night?" A few excited whistles sounded from outside the door. Zhou Yanyan's entire body was trembling. It was unknown whether she was afraid or angry. Han Tianyuan's heart trembled as he listened by the side. If he did not publicly apologize tonight, not only would Mo Jingshan be an oppressive presence, just Jinwan alone would not be easy to deal with. "Miss G, I apologize for my words and actions earlier. Please don't be too calculative on account of the Han family's friendship with the G and Mo families." It was rare for Han Tianyuan to be so serious as to say something that was human. Jinwan coldly smiled. Although the Han family is prosperous, they just had to give birth to an imbecile. With a son like you, your Han family must have suffered retribution 20 years ago. Han Tianyuan resisted the urge to retort, "If Miss G thinks that this will help you vent your anger, then go ahead and scold me." "Scold? People like you, if I kill you, I'm afraid of dirtying my hands. If I scold you, I'm afraid of dirtying my mouth." Jinwan mocked and then smiled. I heard that young Master Han has 2 real estate companies that are about to be sold. Why don't you lower the price and sell them to me? Han Tianyuan was stunned for a moment. He never expected that Jinwan, who had no interest in business, would raise such a condition. Mo Jingshan also glanced at Jinwan. Jinwan glanced at Han Tianyuan's expression. 30 million. The ownership of the 2 companies will belong to me. Deal. 30 million? I have 2 companies. 200 million is already considered a low price. Miss Ji, you're clearly robbing. Jinwan chuckled as though she didn't mind. Oh, it's fine if you don't agree. The corner of Han Tianyuan's mouth twitched. Her expression, it was obvious that she had done it on purpose. Han Tianyuan closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. He could not offend Mo Jingshan. Otherwise, not to mention 2 small companies, even the entire Han family would not be able to survive in Haiqing. Now, even if he was asked to hand over those 2 companies completely, he couldn't refuse. He just didn't know what this little Grandaunt Jinwan was planning. For some reason, she wanted those 2 not-so-profitable real estate companies. All right. 30 million it is. Jinwan smiled. Thank you. In a few days, I'll look for your company's legal department to sign the transfer agreement. Young Master Han, there are so many people here. It's likely that there are even reporters hiding in the crowd. You have to keep your word. Han Tianyuan gritted his teeth. I'll keep it. I'll definitely keep it. Jinwan smiled lightly, holding onto Mo Jingshan's arm. Hubby, let's go, I'm about to starve to death. Mo Jingshan stared at her for a moment. Jinwan felt as though his gaze could see through her very soul. She paused, raising her eyes to look at him. However, he helped her tuck her hair behind her ear and buttoned her collar. Before Jinwan left, she did not forget to buy that shirt. Afterward, she left with her husband under everyone's admiring gazes. The autumn night was cold, but by Mo Jingshan's side, it did not feel cold at all. Jinwan asked as she walked, How did you know I was here? Were you near this building earlier? Mo Jingshan did not reply. He opened the car door for her to enter. After Jinwan entered the car, she quickly stuck her head out. I drove here myself today. Have Shinmu drive your car back. Assistant Shin is also nearby? Jinwan curiously glanced around but did not see anyone. What do you want to eat? Mo Jingshan entered the car. Anything is fine. I'll just eat something simple. About the card being frozen, why didn't you tell me? His tone was mild, but it was clear that he was unhappy with her showing off. It's not completely frozen. Every month there's still around 10,000 yuan. I don't have much to spend, so I didn't tell you. Speaking up to this point, she rushed to hand the black card in her hand to him. I don't lack anything in the Yu Garden. I really don't have much to spend. This card is still for her. Before she could finish, she saw Mo Jingshan glare at her as though if she dared to return the card, he would immediately behead her. Jinwan paused. The current Mo Jingshan was no longer the man who gave in to her step by step when they first got married. If she continued to show off in front of him, if his temper flared up and he really did not care about her in the future, it would be too late for her to cry. She immediately took the card back and placed it in her bag. Then leave it with me first. In the future, if I see any nice shirts or casual clothes, I'll buy them for you. I don't need too much. Buy whatever you like. The street lights outside the car were exceptionally bright. Jinwan looked outside for a while and could not help but turn back to ask, Why did you appear there earlier? Passing by. There were several roads near the hospital. It seemed like it was the only way to return to the Yu Garden from Mo Corporation. Jinwan did not ask further. Instead, she turned her head to look at him. Mo Jingshan was wearing a black, handmade shirt. There were no obvious labels on it, but with a single glance she could tell that it was expensive. She was thinking about how she would definitely let him try on the shirt he just bought when she opened her mouth. However, she sneezed. Achoo! Her nose felt sore and uncomfortable. Jinwan raised her hand to rub her nose. In the end, she sneezed again. Achoo! In the morning, I told you not to catch a cold. Mo Jingshan heard her sneeze and immediately turned on the heater in the car. Jinwan rubbed her nose while speaking in a muffled voice. When I came out in the afternoon, I didn't feel cold. It's probably just that my nose is uncomfortable. I don't think I'll catch a cold. Chapter 15. On the way, Jinwan could not help but sneeze a few more times. Mo Jingshan directly drove the car back to the Yu Garden. He did not even bring her out for dinner and asked Auntie Chen to brew brown sugar ginger tea for her. Jinwan did not take the fact that she had caught a cold to heart. She held the brown sugar ginger tea and took a few sips. The spiciness caused her brows to furrow. In the past, she had always hated drinking this kind of thing. She really could not swallow it. She was just about to place the cup down when she raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshin standing opposite her. It was as if she wouldn't be able to eat tonight if she didn't finish this cup. This ginger tea is too spicy. It was rare for Jin Wan to admit defeat. Can I drink it after eating? Madam, dinner is ready. Please drink the ginger tea first to warm yourself up. Auntie Chin walked over from the side and nagged. Recently, a lot of people have been suffering from particularly serious cold symptoms. My niece from my hometown called me yesterday and said that the cold made her unable to get out of bed for 3 days. It was so uncomfortable that she couldn't even open her eyes. So, madam, you must sweat out tonight. Don't catch a cold. Jinwan raised her eyes. Because she did not like to drink, she could only look at Mo Jingshin with drooping eyelids. Mo Jingshin, you heard it? Drink up. Jinwan was helpless. She could only pick up the cup and take a few more sips. The spiciness was unbearable, but she had no choice but to drink. In the end, she pinched her nose and drank. In the past, Jinwan was not so easy to talk to in this regard. She had suffered from a cold in the north when she was young, so she was particularly prone to colds and fevers. However, she was also stubborn. Every time she got sick, she would lock herself in her room and sleep for 2 days with the quilt over her. She didn't take any medicine, nor did she take any injections. She wouldn't even drink such disgusting brown sugar ginger tea. When the cup was empty, Mo Jingshin indicated for Auntie Chen to prepare dinner as soon as possible because Jinwan had been complaining of hunger outside. Go back to your room and take a hot shower first. Change into some light clothes and come down, Mo Jingshin said. That was exactly what Jinwan was thinking. After all, after drinking it, her body felt hot and uncomfortable. Not long after she returned to her room, she didn't know if she really had some symptoms of the flu, but her head became more and more dizzy. Thinking that a hot bath would be enough, he simply changed his clothes and went straight into the bathroom. After sitting in the hot tub for less than a minute, Jinwan closed her eyes and felt drowsy. However, she could not sleep well. She wanted to wake up, but she could not. She felt as if she was in a world of ice and fire. One moment she felt as if she was in a world of ice and snow. The next moment she felt as if she had entered Taishang Laozi's pill refining furnace. This feeling was extremely uncomfortable. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids were so heavy that he couldn't open them. The nightmare in the darkness attacked her mercilessly. She dreamt that there was a deep cut on her wrist, and blood kept flowing out of the cut. In the dream, she was lying weakly in a hospital that reeked of disinfectant. Her fair wrists were wrapped in layers of bandages and a tall figure stood beside her. He had been standing there for an entire night. A divorce was her. She could not hear the Li, Nuabo, I family, the divorce. The divorce was a few words. The scene kept changing. Jinwan wanted to grab hold of the figure who left, but she could only run aimlessly in the darkness. She dreamed that after the divorce she was shunned by all the elders in the Mo family. Her father was angered by her suicide and divorce and did not allow her to take a single step into the Ji family for 2 whole years. She dreamed that Ji Mingran brought her to a dark bar to get drunk. She dreamed that she was injected with drugs and became addicted to drugs. The Ji family went bankrupt. Her father died with hatred. Her loved ones left her one by one. Her once proud and bright life gradually collapsed. At the most lost time in her life, Xia Tian thought of ways to find her. She brought her home, talked to her and cheered her on. The scene changed again. Jinwan suddenly ran forward crazily in her dream. However, she still could not grab hold of the corner of her dress. She saw Xia Tian lying under the bridge covered in blood. She stared at the wild geese flying across the sky. Even in death she did not close her eyes. Jinwan's faith in life crumbled again and again. All the people who loved her and those she loved were constantly separated by life and death. The people who were once enemies of the Ji family found her. She was kidnapped and threatened. She was brought onto a dilapidated bus and sold to a remote mountain area with several beautiful women. She was sold to a 50-year-old man, who had a retarded son in his 20s. Every time she tried to escape she would be captured. Every time she would be beaten and scolded cruelly. She was almost raped by the disgusting father and son. She used a knife to cut her face and body. Every day she would be covered in blood, making them unable to do anything. Those dark and lightless lives. Why did they still enter her dreams? She wanted to wake up. She did not want the nightmares of her previous life. The dark scene changed again and again. She escaped from the mountain area but was sold to the Yun family in Haicheng. The Yun family's heiress was killed. She was identified as the murderer. The police said that after many investigations, they found out from one of her relatives that she had a grudge with the Yun family's heiress many years ago. This confirmed her motive. Relatives. At that time, aside from Ji Minggran, who had been missing for a long time, she had no other relatives. In the last moments of her life, she was imprisoned for 3 months. She was poisoned and coughed up blood. Her life was miserable, a dream that lasted for 10 years. No. Wake up. Quickly wake up. She did not want to hear news of Mo Jingshan bringing Ji Minggran back to the country. She did not want to. Jinwan struggled bitterly in the nightmares but could not escape from the whirlpool of darkness. She suddenly heard the sound of the bathroom door being opened. A slightly cold hand was gently placed on her head. She's running a fever. Andy Chin, go get the medicine. A calm and clear voice clearly entered her ears. Jinwan abruptly woke up from her dream. Jinwan opened her eyes with some difficulty. In an instant, she was carried out of the water by a strong arm. She was even slightly dazed. She did not know where she was. She did not even notice that she was naked. Her snow-white skin, slender legs, and the snow-white softness of her chest were all exposed before his eyes. Her seaweed-like wet hair fell down. Mo Jingshan wrapped her in a towel due to the unimaginably hot temperature of her body. Jinwan instinctively leaned her head against his chest, closing her eyes in discomfort. Those nightmares did not appear again. She released a sigh of relief. However, she felt as though something warm was about to surge out of her eyes. Thankfully, those were all in the past. This was Mo Jingshan's embrace. It was warm and made one yearn for it. An embrace that belonged solely to her. In her previous life, if she had not been so foolish, even if she had lost everything, at least she still had Mo Jingshan. In the end, even he was pushed away by her. Pushed so far away. She wanted to cry. She held back her tears and buried her head in his embrace. Mr. Mo, this is the quick-acting fever medicine. I've also brought the thermometer. It was Andy Chen's voice. It seemed like she had been running to get the medicine earlier. She was still panting slightly. Jinwan was placed on the bed. She subconsciously raised her hand to tug on the cuffs of his shirt. Even though she was so weak that she did not have any strength left, she still wanted to hold on to him. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to see her movements. He did not stand up to leave but instead held on to her. Don't be afraid. I won't leave. Chapter 16. Seeing her appearance, Mo Jingshan directly measured her temperature. Jinwan then heard him say, 39 degrees. Why did Madam suddenly have a fever after taking a shower? This temperature is too high. Andy Chin panicked. Previously, Madam also fell sick, but she kept locking herself in her room. She didn't eat or take any medicine. I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, Mr. Mo, you're home this time. Otherwise, go get an ice pack. Mo Jingshan calmly interrupted her words. Andy Chen's nagging immediately stopped. She then rushed out to find an ice pack. Jinwan knew that every time she caught a cold, she would definitely have a fever. Mo Jingshan also knew this, which was why he often reminded her not to catch a cold. Come, take the medicine. Mo Jingshan helped her up from the bed. She sat in his arms and didn't struggle. She only frowned when he fed her the antipyretic. In the past, she rarely took medicine because she had to drink Chinese medicine every day to recuperate from a cold when she was young. As a result, she was very resistant to any bitter medicine. She would rather sleep for a few days than take medicine. Be obedient. Eat the medicine. Mo Jingshan softly coaxed her. She rested her head on his arm, opening her eyes to look at him. Her gaze was slightly pleading. Could she not eat it? He was silent for a moment before softly asking, Do you want me to change the method to feed you? Jinwan curiously asked softly, Change what method? Could it be that he wanted to prepare some sweets for her? When she was young, the Ji family's helper auntie would always prepare fruit sweets for her under her coquettish behavior. However, the sweets she expected did not appear. Under her gaze, Mo Jingshan directly brought the medicine to his mouth. Jinwan immediately understood and hurriedly raised her hand to block it. She then carefully pressed down on his hand and fed the pill into her mouth. Although she did not object to him feeding her mouth to mouth, she did not want to pass the cold to him. The bitterness spread in her mouth. She furrowed her brows and rushed to receive the glass he handed over. She drank a large mouthful of warm water and swallowed the medicine. However, she felt that her throat was extremely bitter. So bitter. You clearly know that you can't catch a cold, yet you don't even wear a coat when you go out. Do you want me to lock you up in the Yew Garden every autumn and winter? Mo Jingshin touched her damp hair, speaking in a heavy voice, "Sit properly. Don't lie down. Dry your hair before you sleep." Jinwan remained in his arms, refusing to move. She had drunk a few mouthfuls of water and did not feel as uncomfortable as before. However, she did not have much strength left. Seeing her sickly and dependent appearance, Mo Jingshin sighed slightly. He stood up to find the hairdryer, bringing it to the bedside and plugging it in. Jinwan sat on the bed and really didn't have the strength to dry her hair. She turned to look at him and was about to ask him to help her dry her hair, but before she could speak, she heard the sound of his hand drying her hair. The warm wind blew through her hair and her scalp. She was originally slightly dizzy, and because of the nightmares earlier, she felt as though she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Her emotions were tense, but this sudden warmth and comfort allowed her to relax. After a few minutes, she began to feel extremely sleepy. The cold medicine and fever medicine had a slight hypnotic effect. Jinwan closed her eyes and felt drowsy. When her hair was completely dry, Mo Jingshin turned off the hairdryer. Her body tilted and she was about to fall. Mo Jingshin reached out to support her. Seeing that she was falling asleep too quickly, she quietly leaned in his arms. The air was filled with the sound of her quiet and even breathing. He sighed softly and leaned over to help her lie down on the bed. His gaze inadvertently touched her body that was wrapped in a towel. Just now in the bathroom he could only pull out one hand to help her wrap the towel. At this moment the towel had loosened a lot on her body. Her chest was as soft as snow, and her long hair hung down, half covering her body. She was completely soft and relaxed in his arms. Mo Jingshin's eyes slowly darkened. At the same time he felt that her hands were ice cold. Her body was burning hot, but her hands were ice cold. His breathing was heavy as he held her hand, placing it in his palm. A moment later he seemed to have thought of something. His gaze shifted to her snow-white feet that were exposed outside the towel. He touched it and found that her feet were also cold. It was as cold as her hands, especially in his palm. It was so cold that he furrowed his brows. Jinwan softly moaned in her sleep. It was as though she was moaning in comfort due to the warmth from his hands and feet. Mo Jingshin covered her with the blanket, ensuring that only her head was exposed. His hand gently caressed her burning forehead, sliding down the soft hair on her head. Jinwan did not sleep well. Her body was already burning hot, and now that her entire body was covered, the heat caused her to feel uncomfortable. She struggled slightly but was held down by him. "Mr. Mo?" Auntie Chen pushed the door open and entered. She placed the ice pack by the side. Seeing that Jinwan was already asleep, she softly said, "I just made some food for Madam and even cooked porridge. Should I let her eat some? She hasn't eaten dinner yet." "Keep the porridge warm. She can eat it when she wakes up. Right now, even if she were to sit up, she would most likely be so sleepy that it would be difficult for her to even open her mouth." "All right then. Sir, go and rest. Leave this to me. I'll take care of Madam." "There's no need. I'll be here tonight." Although Jinwan was very sleepy, she didn't sleep well. Half asleep, she felt that the side of her bed seemed to have sunk a little. She was sweating a little and her body was wet and sticky, which made her feel uncomfortable. Her pretty brows were furrowed, and her expression was one of self-loathing. A few seconds later she was carried into someone's arms, and the quilt covered her tightly, leaving no gap. "So hot," she said in a daze. Mo Jingshin hugged her by her side, covering her with the blanket that she tried to kick away again and again. When her hands and feet were no longer as cold, and her body temperature had also decreased due to her sweat, Mo Jingshin caressed her sweaty hair. "Bear with it. Once the fever subsides you won't feel so uncomfortable, en?" She quietened down. In the middle of the night, Jinwan suddenly woke up. She stared at the man in front of her. Due to her high fever, her eyes were slightly bloodshot. She stared at him silently. After being stared at by her for a minute, Mo Jingshin opened his eyes. "You're awake? Auntie Chen has been keeping the porridge warm for you. Get up and eat some." He stood up. Jinwan rushed to grab his hand, unwilling to let go. "I'm not eating." "Don't go." The dependence and longing in her voice were not concealed at all. Mo Jingshin's hand that was about to withdraw froze in place. Chapter 17. Still uncomfortable? He sat back on the bed, holding her in his embrace and rubbing her head. Jinwan shook her head, leaning into his embrace. "Much better." Auntie Chen must have been worried. In the middle of the night, she passed by the door and heard the movements inside. She rushed to bring the porridge up. Mr. Mo, it's already very late. Let me feed Madam the porridge. Her fever was so serious earlier. She needs to eat something. Mo Jingshin used his free hand to receive the bowl. No need. I'll do it. Auntie Chen was shocked that Mo Jingshin really did not leave Jinwan's side even after she had a fever. It seemed like this pair of strangers were really going to start living good lives. Auntie Chen smiled and did not disturb them further. She quickly left the room and gently closed the door. Jinwan smelled the porridge. There seemed to be some minced meat in it. It was very fragrant. She immediately glanced at the bowl, and the moment she did so, she became even hungrier. Mo Jingshin tugged his hand away from hers and leaned forward slightly. He supported her shoulder with one hand and helped her sit up, leaning into his embrace. Although Jinwan was no longer as dizzy, she was still weak. She leaned against his chest as though there were no bones in her body. Her forehead seemed to be pressed against his chin. Her eyes were glued to the porridge in the bowl. She was like a kitten begging for its owner to feed it. At the same time, she could feel his light breath on her head. It was soft. Mo Jingshin brought a spoonful of porridge to her mouth. Open your mouth. This time Jinwan was very obedient. She opened her mouth obediently. When she swallowed, she felt her taste buds awaken. It was really fragrant. Seeing that she was willing to eat and that her appetite seemed to have increased, Mo Jingshin chuckled softly. Just like that, he fed her the entire bowl, mouthful by mouthful. Jinwan lay back on the bed after eating her fill, enjoying Mo Jingshin's care. My body is covered in sweat. Can I shower again? She asked softly. Your fever hasn't completely subsided. Shower tomorrow morning. But my body is so sticky. It's so uncomfortable. Endure it for one night. He turned off the light, leaving only the dim yellow light in front of the bed. Sleep for a few more hours. I'll check your temperature again in the morning. Mo Jingshin lay down by her side. Jinwan began to move closer to his side until he held her in his arms. At the same time, he patted her back to urge her to sleep. However, Jinwan pressed her head against his arm, softly saying, Just now, you directly carried me out of the bathtub. Mo Jingshin did not speak. She then said vaguely, You've already seen me naked, so it's not too much to carry me in for a bath. I haven't even said anything yet, Mo Jingshin. In the end, because Jinwan couldn't fall asleep without taking a shower, she reluctantly asked Mo Jingshin to take her to take another shower. She washed until her whole body smelled fragrant and relaxed. She felt that her illness had mostly healed. Then he wrapped her in a towel and carried her back to the bed. But this time, Mo Jingshin did not hug her to sleep. Jinwan turned over. Under the dim yellow light, she stared at the man who strangely slept with his back facing her. She raised her hand and poked his back. Why are you turning your back to me? She asked. Her voice was still slightly hoarse. Mo Jingshin did not reply. He held her small hand that was poking his back and pressed it down. Sleep, he said mildly. His low voice hid an unknown hoarseness. Jinwan felt that she was ill, so she suddenly felt a little fragile in her heart. Her heart immediately became fragile. She was unhappy that his back was facing her, so she simply leaned close to him. She leaned against his back, placed her hand on his shoulder, and pressed her face against his back. Can you turn around? I want you to hug me to sleep. Earlier on, you were still fine. Why are you suddenly turning your back to me? He then heard her soft, mosquito-like grumbles. He sighed slightly and turned around. In the end, he still hugged her as she wished. The moment he turned around, Jinwan abruptly felt the change in his lower body. She seemed to know the reason. Was it too late for him to carry her again? Right now, Mo Jingshin could not bear to look at her watery gaze. He hugged her and pressed her head against his chest. After you recover, let me help you bathe again. He softly and hoarsely bit her ear. His voice was low and heavy, but it contained a threat that caused her to blush. I don't mind bathing with you for an entire night. Jinwan instantly became obedient. She did not move at all in his arms. However, she could not sleep right now. Her hand gently tugged on the exquisite buttons of his shirt. She felt that although he did not move, he should not be able to sleep easily in this situation. She looked up from the angle of his chin at the man who was impeccably handsome from every angle. Did you notice that I've changed a lot? She asked. For the past 2 days, Mo Jingshin's gaze had landed on her body several times in an attempt to see through her. He was clearly suspicious of her change, but he did not show it. Since that was the case, she might as well take the initiative. His hand gently patted her back, as though he was coaxing a child who could not sleep and was always looking for a topic to talk about. He did not answer. Then do you like the current me? Or do you like the previous me? Under the wall lamp, her gaze was as bright as the moon. Even if she had a fever, it could not hide the light in her eyes. It's all you. What's the difference? His tone was unhurried. Of course there's a difference. In the past, I was unwilling to accept our marriage, but now I'm trying very hard to get close to you. Jinwan buried her head in his neck, softly and hoarsely saying, in the past, you were good to me. Even if I was always mischievous, you never stopped approaching me. Regardless of whether you think my change is too sudden or not, please don't doubt my heart. Even if there's 100 steps between us, you've already taken dozens of steps. Even if you're tired from walking, leave the rest to me. Let me walk, let me learn to cherish everything, to have you, okay. The air fell into silence. Jinwan wanted to see Mo Jingshin's expression right now. She had never confessed to anyone like this in either of her lives. However, when she tried to raise her head, she was held tightly in his arms. Even her head was pressed tightly against his neck. For a moment she could not raise it. Mo Jingshin, he still did not speak. What I said earlier was serious. I'm not muddled from the fever. All of a sudden she heard his low and restrained voice from above her head. If you continue, I'm afraid I won't be able to take care of your body's condition. Are you sure you want to continue to provoke me? Jinwan was slightly surprised. Chapter 18. Jinwan suddenly felt a kiss pressed against her brows. Don't think that I won't be disturbed. You're still sick. Be good and sleep. His light voice landed on her brows. Seeing that her eyes were still open, he softly said, hurry and sleep. This time Jinwan really did not speak. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cool, pleasant scent that belonged to him. It was a sense of belonging that made her feel at ease. The next morning, Jinwan slept until 9 o'clock before waking up. She raised her hand to press against her head. Even though her fever had subsided, she still had the symptoms of a cold. She sat up and pushed aside the blankets. Just as she was about to get off the bed, she suddenly paused and lowered her head to look at herself. She was wearing a soft silk nightgown. Last night, she had clearly bathed and wrapped herself in a towel to sleep. Did Andy-chan help her change into this? The room door was suddenly opened. She raised her head with her messy hair to see Mo Jingshin enter the room. The automatic curtains were slowly pulled open, and the golden rays of the sun landed on his body. The man before her had a clear aura and was so handsome that it caused one to fall into a trance. Mo Jingshin saw her sitting by the bed with a dazed expression. Feeling better? What time is it now? You didn't go to the company? Jinwan snapped out of her daze. She did not answer but instead asked. She picked up the phone by the bedside and glanced at it. 9:30? It was already 9:30. Although Mo Jingshin did not need to be at the company every day, in her memory, he rarely missed work days and rarely took vacations. There's nothing to do at the company today. It's fine if you don't go. Mo Jingshin approached the bedside and picked up the thermometer. While Jinwan was still in a daze, he took her temperature again. Jinwan was blaming herself for affecting his work schedule when she heard him say, 37. 6 degrees. How do you feel now? Much better. It's not as uncomfortable as last night. Jinwan raised her hand to touch her head. This temperature shouldn't be considered a fever, right? There's still a slight fever. Don't go out today. Stay at home and take your medicine. Mo Jingshin pressed down on her shoulders, pushing her back onto the bed. If you want to eat anything, ask Andy Chen to send it up. Don't wander around in. It's not like my illness is that serious. Besides, this isn't considered a fever. Before Jinwan could finish speaking, footsteps came from outside. A helper said from outside, Mr. Mo, there's a call for you. Mo Jingshin glanced at Jinwan, indicating for her to stay in the room obediently. He then went out to answer the call. Jinwan sat on the bed, picked up the glass of water next to her, and took a sip to moisten her throat. Then she picked up her cell phone and sent a message to Xia Tian. Yesterday, she had promised Xia Tian that she would go to the hospital to accompany her today. However, based on the current situation, Mo Jingshin would definitely not allow her to go out today. Moreover, her body, which was afraid of the cold, really needed to be nursed back to health. She couldn't fall sick so seriously after catching a cold. She couldn't be too delicate. Downstairs, Mo Jingshin walked down the marble staircase and saw the landline placed on the coffee table. He asked indifferently, who called? The servant respectfully said, it's Miss Mengran. Mo Jingshin's footsteps paused, his gaze cold and indifferent as he glanced at the servant. The servant hurriedly explained, Earlier, Miss Mingran suddenly called. Originally, I was curious as to why she didn't call Madame's cell phone and instead called the landline. In a moment of carelessness, I told her that Madame was sick last night. Then Miss Mingran asked if Mr. Emo had gone to the company. I said that you were staying at home to accompany Madame today. She then said that she wanted you to answer the phone. Emo Jingshan's expression was cold and distant. He did not walk over, coldly saying, "In the future, if you receive a call from the G family's second miss, there's no need to inform me." The servant hurriedly nodded. "I understand, Mr. Emo. Then this call, tell her that Madame's illness is already fine. There's no need to ask about her sister's condition from me. If she really wants to, let her ask Jinwan herself." Emo Jingshan turned around and walked back. Ji Mingran was waiting expectantly on the phone. She had even prepared a draft in her mind, preparing what she was going to say to Emo Jingshan when he came to pick up the call. Right now she could not go to the U Garden often. Although she could not go, she had to find an opportunity to have a good chat with Emo Jingshan. Jinwan's change was truly strange. She just did not know what Emo Jingshan's current attitude was. That day, Jinwan had said that she did not plan on getting a divorce. However, the things that Jinwan had done previously were all out of line. Could Emo Jingshan really endure it? "Hello, Miss Mingran, I'm really sorry. Mr. Emo is currently taking care of Madame and can't find the time to pick up the call." On the other end of the phone, the servant's voice suddenly came through. Mr. Emo said that if Miss Mingran wishes to be concerned about Madame's condition, you can ask Madame yourself. After all, the servant did not dare to speak so bluntly. Her tone was already very tactful. However, Ji Mingran could hear the meaning behind her words. He did not want to pick up her call at all. Earlier on, she had clearly heard Emo Jingshan's movements on the phone. He had clearly gone downstairs to pick up the call, but he actually did not come to pick up. In the past, Emo Jingshan had never placed her in his eyes. She wanted to go to the U Garden more often and appear in front of him more often to let him see her good side. In any case, she was much better than that unreasonable Jinwan who kept asking for a divorce. Sooner or later he would have different feelings for her. However, before all of this had progressed, she could no longer go to the U Garden. She did not even have the chance to approach him. Right now he did not even pick up the call. She had no idea what stage the relationship between Emo Jingshan and Jinwan had reached. Ji Mingran was so angry that her face was about to twist. She angrily said, "How did you pass the message? Didn't you say that I was looking for Brother Jingshan for something? I'm very clear about my sister's condition. She's like this every time she catches a cold. Why would I need to ask? Go tell Brother Jingshan that I'm looking for him to tell. Miss Mingran, if you have any matters, please call Sir and Madam's cell phone. Usually, only the Emo family's elders will call this phone. You can directly call them to communicate. I'm really sorry, I have to go deal with other matters." The helper hurriedly finished speaking and directly hung up. "Hello. You're not allowed to hang up, you." The sound of the phone being hung up could be heard. Ji Mingran's expression was ugly as she forcefully threw the phone onto the bed. Ever since she was young, Jinwan had always liked to go against her father. However, she was still the one who was most valued by her father. Why wasn't she the one who married Emo Jingshan? Why was Jinwan able to obtain all of the things she wanted so effortlessly? Was it because her performance previously was too obvious? Why on earth did Jinwan suddenly exclude her? Even if Jinwan did not say it out loud, Ji Mingran could clearly feel that her attitude toward her had clearly changed greatly. But so what if it changed? There would not be any outcome between Emo Jingshan and Jinwan. Chapter 19. In the master bedroom, Kacha Kacha, Jinwan listened to the sound of him chewing on an apple and felt helpless and amused. "Nwan, you didn't forget to tell me not to contact the man who hurt me. What's going on? Do you know that person?" Xia Tian nibbled on the apple and asked vaguely on the phone. "Anyway, he's not a good person. Just stay away from him." Jinwan was very insistent on this matter. From your tone, it sounds like he's a scumbag." "Yes, it's trash. Scum to death. He could be called a scumbag on a hunger strike. So, you absolutely must not get too close to him. Ahem, don't get too worked up. If I see him again, I'll take a detour. Is that okay?" Xia Tian coaxed her. "I promise to keep my distance from him." Jinwan curved her lips, but her smile did not reach her eyes. That scumbag who caused Xia Tian to die with everlasting regret, better not let her see him again in this life. Xia Tian finished the apple, wiped her mouth, and turned to look at the TV in the ward. The news just now was very interesting. Some time ago, at a banquet, Zhou Yanyan deliberately went against you. That Miss Zhou whose tail was about to reach the sky. Do you still remember her? Why did you mention her? They had just met last night, and Jinwan could not be bothered to mention such a person. She did not expect Xia Tian to suddenly mention her. Didn't you see the news? Last night, Zhou Yanyan wore a bikini and danced pole for 3 hours at Haitian Plaza. I felt like she was high from a drug overdose. Later, there were too many onlookers, so she was taken away by the police on the spot. What's more, she's not on some gossip news about the rich and powerful, but social news that affects public security. Ha, I'm dying of laughter. She really went to jump? Of course. Just now, the TV had even cut to a few shots from a distance. One look and you can tell that it is Zhou Yanyan herself. Ha, serves you right. Why do I feel like you know about this? That Zhou Yanyan's mouth was so foul that I wanted to slap her a few times. Now, it was really retribution. She deserved to be disgraced. I just don't know what happened to her last night, Aya. It's too boring in the hospital. I don't have any news and can only watch TV, Jinwan smiled. The heavens are watching. She asked for it. With that, Jinwan picked up the remote control and looked at the LCD screen on the wall of the tea room on the other side of the bedroom. He found Haiqing News and Television Station. At this time, the news about Zhou Yanyan disrupting public order and pole dancing last night had already passed. They were currently broadcasting the scene of the Zhou family being surrounded by reporters. Based on Zhou Yanyan's father's temper, he was probably about to explode in anger. His daughter had embarrassed herself to the point that the entire Haiqing knew about it. She was even labeled as suspected of taking drugs, wearing revealing clothes, and pole dancing, which made them unable to lift their heads. Even if the Zhou family racked their brains, they could not be considered one of the 4 great families of Hai City. However, their reputation in Hai City was not low. Now that this had happened, the Zhou family's company's shares would probably fall as well. Such a butterfly effect, Zhou Yanyan herself probably did not expect it. Nuanyuan, this has nothing to do with you, right? Xia Tian suddenly asked. Why do you suddenly ask? I heard that there are people behind the Zhou family, and they are all from the underworld. You had better not get involved in this matter. Otherwise, if they play dirty behind your back, it would be troublesome. Jinwan recalled the unwilling expression in Zhou Yanyan's eyes yesterday and smiled mildly. It's fine. As long as the Ji family is around, no matter what kind of underworld they are from, no one will dare to touch me. Indeed. If they want to touch you in Hai City, not only do they have to consider the Ji family's face, they also have to consider if the Mo family is easy to provoke. Xia Tian spoke while clicking her tongue. TSK, Mo Jingshan is your greatest support. If you still don't learn how to hug your husband's thigh tightly, if one day he is snatched away by someone else, there will be a time for you to cry. Jinwan smiled. Don't worry. I'm the only one on his thigh. There's no space for others to hug. Mo Jingshan stood outside the door and did not enter. When he heard, I'm the only one on his thigh, his thin lips curved slightly. He picked up the phone and dialed a number with his long fingers. He walked to the end of the long hallway, his deep and calm eyes staring out the window. Help me do something. On the other end of the phone was a low and cold man's voice. It carried a hint of laziness and sexiness. N? Monitor Hai City's Zhou family's every move. If there are any movements with unknown people, immediately inform me. Keep an eye on both the underworld and the underworld. Don't give them a chance to play tricks in the dark. Zhou family? Did they offend you? Mo Jingshan calmly replied, more or less. Keep an eye on them. After a moment of silence, a light chuckle came from the other end of the phone. All right, I understand. Mo Jingshan put down the phone and turned back to see that Jinwan had already walked out of the bedroom. Hungry again? He directly walked over. Jinwan rubbed her stomach awkwardly. Perhaps it's because I'm sick. My body is exhausted too quickly. I clearly just ate last night. Return to the room and wait. I'll call Auntie Chen to send food up. Seeing that her movements were slightly sluggish as she stood by the door without moving, Mo Jingshan glanced at her again. What else do you want? I still want to eat the Su Ji family's 4-style glutinous rice balls near your company. Seeing Mo Jingshan's refined brows move slightly, she rushed to say, actually, it's fine if I don't eat it. Everything Auntie Chen makes is delicious. I'll just eat the breakfast Auntie Chen makes. Seeing that she rarely had such a greedy mouth, yet also wanted to defend herself, Mo Jingshan could not help but laugh. He raised his hand to rub her hair. I'll go buy it. Really? Mo Jingshan lightly curved his lips, indicating for her to return to the room to wait. Jinwan obediently turned back to the room. When she closed the door, she secretly peeked out. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had already gone downstairs, she felt that she had been assimilated by that glutton, Xia Tian. A bowl of Auntie Chen's porridge and a bowl of glutinous rice balls was enough to make her happy for half a day. The Su Ji family's 4-style glutinous rice balls that Jinwan mentioned were indeed near the Mo Corporation. The black ghost was parked by the roadside. Mo Jingshan alighted from the car and saw that there was a very long queue in front of this small shop. He glanced at the time and walked over. In front of him there were 2 young girls also lining up. One of them suddenly nudged the girl behind her, softly saying, "Quick, look. Isn't that Mo Jingshan?" The other girl turned back. Her expression was filled with shock as she softly exclaimed, "It's just his appearance, right? Why would CEO Mo personally line up in front of a small shop like this to buy glutinous rice balls? Look at that car parked nearby. That's a 100-year commemorative ghost. There's only one in the entire world. I heard that it's Mo Jingshan's car. That shouldn't be wrong, right?" Chapter 20. The line in front of the shop was very long. Mo Jingshan did not send anyone to buy for him, nor did he order anyone to cut the line. After around 40 minutes, they finally bought the 4 types of glutinous rice balls that Jinwan had ordered. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was about to leave, the 2 girls hid under a tree by the side and said love-struck, "Mo Jingshan actually has the patience to line up to buy this kind of snack. I eat the same kind of snack as my male god, ah. Come on, didn't you see that he didn't buy a single person's portion? I don't think he wants to eat it himself. It seems like he really bought a lot. Only girls like this dessert. Who did you buy it for?" The great Mo Jingshan spent so much effort to line up for this kind of thing. He must have bought it for a woman. Do you think it's possible that CEO Mo has another woman outside? I don't think so. Do you remember the news about Zhou Yanyan this morning? It was said that last night, Zhou Yanyan had offended President Mo because she had said some nasty words in front of Mrs. Mo. At that time there were many onlookers. Those people all said that last night was the first time they saw President Mo in person. Who would have thought that he actually dotes on his wife so much? I'm guessing that this glutinous rice ball was bought for his wife. What kind of fortune did that Missy of the G family cultivate in her past life? That's not right. My best friend has a good relationship with the G family's second Mississippi. I heard from that second miss that her sister's relationship with Mo Jingshan has always been in a state of marriage but no love. It's likely that they will divorce soon. She also said that the G family has always been troubled by this matter, and that eldest Miss G doesn't know how to cherish the people in front of her. What's the use of hearing? Seeing is believing. Do you have the number of the G family's second miss? Hurry up and tell her that we have some first-line information. Maybe we can also take the opportunity to get closer to the G family's second miss. In the future we can be considered to have friends from a wealthy family. Yes, let me find the phone. G family. Ji Minggran tossed and turned on the bed, throwing the quilts and pillows all over the floor as if she was venting her anger. Suddenly her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID impatiently. It was an unfamiliar number. She looked at it suspiciously for a while before picking it up. After listening to the content of the call, Ji Minggran's expression became more and more unsightly. In the end she directly hung up. Mo Jingshan actually lowered himself to line up for Jinwan to buy glutinous rice balls? She didn't even need his help and went to line up herself. Usually Mo Jingshan was so busy in the company that every minute was precious. Yet he actually spent so much time queuing up to buy glutinous rice balls. When did Jinwan become so delicate? She actually wanted Mo Jingshan to buy something for her. She was really shameless. No. She had to make things clear to Mo Jingshan. Jinwan's recent changes were definitely unusual. He had to make Mo Jingshan more vigilant. He couldn't let Jinwan take over him like this. Ji Minggran reluctantly picked up her phone and dialed Mo Jingshan's private number. She refused to believe that the phone was still in Jinwan's hands. Sorry, the number you have dialed is currently unavailable. Please try again later. Ji Minggran frowned. She had a bad feeling about this and quickly called again. Every time he called, he would get the same cold and flat female voice. It was like a ditch that she could never cross. Ji Minggran was anxious and annoyed. Right now, no matter if he was on the way back to the U Garden or in the U Garden, his cell phone signal would not be bad. He did not turn off his cell phone, yet she received the same notification several times. It could only mean that her number had been blocked. Madam, you're only eating such a small bowl. Will you be full? Auntie Chen saw that Jinwan's appetite was not bad, Yet she only ate a small bowl before putting it down. She could not help but urge her to eat more. Before Jinwan could speak, Mo Jingshan had already returned to the Yu garden. Auntie Chen saw the bag in Mo Jingshan's hands when he entered and immediately smiled in understanding. No wonder when Madame was eating earlier, her eyes kept glancing outside. It turned out that Mr. Mo had personally bought snacks for her. Auntie Chen deftly kept the bowls away. After giving a few more reminders, she quickly walked out of the room. Jinwan sat by the bed. She watched as Mo Jingshan entered and placed the glutinous balls he bought on the bedside table. He then opened the plastic covers of the bag in the takeaway box. You actually really bought it? Did you line up for a long time? Earlier on, I only ate a little less to leave space in my stomach. Smelling the aroma, Jinwan stood up and moved closer. The sweet and fragrant scent wafted through the air. She had not eaten this flavor for 10 years. Just by smelling it, she could feel the sweetness in her heart. It's not that long. Do you like to eat this kind of thing? Mo Jingshan did not pass the spoon to her. After opening it for her, he glanced at her. Seeing that she was about to move closer to eat, he could not help but chuckle lowly. The Ji family is very strict. I rarely have the opportunity to eat this kind of snack. I've had it by chance twice and I've always remembered the taste. Jinwan spoke as she took another whiff. She reached out to fan the bowl against her nose. Don't burn yourself. Go sit down first, Mo Jingshan calmly said. Jinwan obediently returned to the bed. She thought that Mo Jingshan wanted her to let it cool before eating. Unexpectedly, he placed the glutinous balls into a bowl by the side. After letting it cool for 2 minutes, he walked over, scooped a spoonful and brought it to her mouth. Eat it, it's not hot anymore. She stared at him blankly. However, she only watched for a moment before opening her mouth and swallowing the glutinous ball under his gaze. So sweet, so warm. Her heart seemed to be filled with countless pink bubbles because of this sweet and warm taste. He fed her another spoonful. Jinwan swallowed it and rushed to say, I can eat it myself. The swelling on your head has just subsided, and in the blink of an eye, you've caught a cold and become like this. I'm letting you eat such a hot thing by yourself. If you accidentally burn your hand again, I'm afraid I'll have to arrange for a 24-hour nanny by your side to barely feel at ease. As he spoke, he fed her again. Every spoonful that Mo Jingshan fed her was at the right temperature. Furthermore, there were glutinous balls mixed with a light broth. The taste was neither too dry nor too watery. It was very sweet but not cloying. A caretaker who doesn't sleep 24 hours a day? Is that a robot or a monster that doesn't sleep? Jinwan chewed on the glutinous ball in her mouth. Besides, how am I so unreliable? I'm just eating something. Why would I burn myself? Mo Jingshan mildly curved his lips, stuffing another one into her mouth. There are too many times when you're unreliable. Jinwan's mouth was stuffed full of glutinous balls. For a moment she could not retort. She opened her mouth vaguely but was stopped by Mo Jingshan's glare. Don't speak. You're doing it on purpose? This fellow was too black-bellied. Without letting her speak, he fed her so much. Just as she was about to speak, he fed her another one. Chapter 21. Just after noon, Jinwan took her medicine under Mo Jingshan's supervision. Although her fever was gone, she was given another pill of cold medicine. This caused her to sleep again in the afternoon. When she woke up, the sky was still bright, but it was already evening. The room was quiet. Jinwan stood up and walked out. She did not see Mo Jingshan's figure and thought he was in the study. She turned to look for him but could not find him. Madam, you're awake. The helper heard her voice and walked over. Are you looking for Mr. Mo? Jinwan turned back to look at the helper. Not only was Mo Jingshan nowhere to be seen, even Auntie Chen was not around. Mo Jingshan went to the company? Could it be that there was something urgent that required him to go over? Mr. Mo is downstairs entertaining guests. Yes? Aside from Ji Minggran, who had received special permission to come here often, there were usually no other relatives or friends who would come here. The elders of the Ji family and Mo family had not come here in the past half a year. If they wanted to see them, they would usually ask them to return and not come to the Yu garden. So why would there suddenly be guests? However, since someone had come, it was not appropriate for Jinwan to be in her sickly state and in her pajamas. Seeing that the helper had turned to busy herself, she returned to her room to change her clothes. She tidied herself up to look better before walking out. She had just walked down the stairs. Before she could clearly see who it was, she heard a woman's voice. Jingshan, you must be very busy right now, right? Recently you haven't been back to the Mo family much. AI, there are so many things waiting for you to take over at home, but you, this child, have to set up your own business at such a young age. The Mo family's company in America also needs. The voice abruptly paused due to Jinwan's appearance. That earnest and well-meaning tone immediately turned into a mocking tone. Eldest Miss G, have you woken up? As expected, you've been pampered since you were young. It's fine if you don't work and just stay at home, but you actually wake up so late every day. You really don't know the suffering of the world. She's sick. I'm the one who allowed her to sleep until now after taking her medicine. Mo Jingshan looked at Jinwan. Jinwan recognized her and walked over. Annie, I'm really sorry. The helper didn't tell me it was you. This was Mo Jingshan's paternal aunt, Mo Pailan. She was the daughter of Elder Mo's younger brother and could only be considered a distant relative. However, Elder Mo's generation was very close, so these juniors all established themselves in Haicheng and often met at the Mo family's various banquets. As if not hearing Jinwan's words, Mo Pailan coldly glanced at her. It doesn't matter which family's precious daughter she is. Since she has entered the Mo family, she can't treat this place as her own home. There are no rules or manners at all. Jingshan, you have to control her. You can't let her do as she pleases. Mo Jingshan's expression was indifferent. This is the Yu Garden, not the Mo family. She doesn't need to follow any rules. That won't do. Although it's not an old-fashioned era now, it's not right for the Mo family's daughter-in-law to be so ignorant and lazy all the time. Mo Jingshan smiled coldly, ignoring her clearly unkind words. Seeing that Jinwan was still standing there, he calmly said, "Aren't you tired of standing? Come and sit down." Jinwan smiled and obediently walked over. She sat down by his side in front of Mo Pailan. Seeing that they were sitting so close to each other, Mo Pailan's expression suddenly turned ugly. Her daughter, Mo Jiashue, who was sitting by Mo Pailan's side, also narrowed her eyes. Her expression did not appear very happy. Auntie Chen brought over a pot of good tea that she had brought back from the Mo family. Under Mo Jingshan's signal, she also left the hot water on the coffee table. Better? Mo Jingshan poured a cup of hot water for Jinwan. She had a cold right now and could not drink tea. Apart from eating and sleeping the entire day, I do feel much better now. Jinwan smiled as she sat by his side, as though she did not see the mother and daughter's increasingly ugly expressions. You also know that apart from eating, you only know how to eat and sleep? How can you be so lazy? Jingshan has been married to you for more than half a year. Up until now, I haven't seen you return to the Mo family. Those who don't know would think that our Jingshan is still single. Mo Pailan, who had been ignored for a long time, rolled her eyes. Miss G is really delicate. Just because you're sick, you can make Jingshan put down the company's matters and stay at home to take care of you. Jinwan turned to look at her. Auntie, there's still more than a week until Grandfather Mo's 80th birthday. I'm preparing to visit him on his birthday. If you don't go back on Grandfather Mo's birthday, I'm afraid that you won't be able to enter the Mo family's door in the future. Mo Pailan snorted. Jinwan raised her beautiful brows without batting an eyelid. Her tone was light and slow. Usually he's already busy enough. I don't go back often. Isn't it so that he can have more peaceful time? Mo Pailan's expression stiffened. Her eyes were filled with dissatisfaction. The meaning of Jinwan's words was that, in order to cling onto the Mo family's thigh, these relatives, who usually had nothing to do with each other, were constantly trying to win over kinship with Elder Mo, causing Elder Mo to not even have a moment of peace? It's indeed better if you don't go back often. Otherwise, the Mo family will still have to listen to your face. Mo Pailan's expression was slightly awkward. Her tone was also very harsh. I don't know what possessed Jingshan to fall for you. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows due to Mo Pailan's tone and attitude of questioning Jinwan. His brows were filled with coldness. Mo Pailan's voice then raised a few decibels. Back then you didn't know what was good for you. You didn't have a good expression when you got married. Ever since you got married, there hasn't been any news from your belly. I think you don't have any intentions of living a good life. Then why are you still using the title of Mrs. Mo? Hurry up and leave. Return our Jingshan his freedom. There are so many good girls who wish to marry him. In such a large Haicheng, there are at least tens of thousands of young ladies who are worthy of our Jingshan. Mo Jingshan abruptly opened his mouth. His tone was cold and indifferent. Auntie Chen, send the guests out. She could hear the coldness and slight anger in his voice. Jinwan did not speak but took the initiative to place her hand in his palm. She gently pressed on his palm, indicating that she would not mind these words. Mo Pailan did not plan to leave. She sat on the sofa and refused to leave. Jingshen, I haven't finished speaking. Today I specially made a trip to the Mo Corporation. In the end, they said that you didn't go to the company today. Since you must set up your own business, of course the company's matters are more important. But you're actually at home taking care of Jinwan. I know what's important and what's not. There's no need for Auntie to worry about this. Mo Jingshen's gaze was still cold. His initial politeness had disappeared. Chapter 22. Even if the news of Jinwan's divorce had not spread, the Mo family was well aware of it. Mo Pailan put herself in his shoes and said, Jingshen, don't mind Auntie's words. I'm just feeling sorry for you. Her hand was gently held in Mo Jingshen's palm as if she was not affected by these words at all. Jinwan understood and said with a smile, you must have misunderstood something. There was a period of time when Jingshen and I had a little quarrel, and we had a cold war for a long time. Besides, our parents didn't even bother with our affairs. Auntie, don't you think you're stretching your hand too far? Mo Pailan thought that Jinwan was relying on his presence to be so unruly. She did not expect that she would be so arrogant to such an extent. She actually dared to directly refute her words. Jinwan is still sick. She needs absolute quiet space to rest. Mo Jingshen did not care about Mo Pailan's choked expression at all. If you're just here to walk around and relax, forgive me for not keeping you company, Mom. Mo Jiashue, who sat by Mo Pailan's side, carefully tugged on her hand, lowering her voice to say, don't say any more, let's talk business. Humph, ever since he was young he's always been like an iceberg. I only said a few words to Jinwan, and he's actually so protective of her. Mo Pailan glared harshly at Jinwan. Take care. I won't send you off. Mo Jingshen no longer looked at them, holding Jinwan's hand as they stood up. His intention to chase them away was too obvious. Mo Pailan rushed to say, wait. I'm talking business. Jingshen Jiashue can be considered your cousin. This year, she graduated from High University's business department. She's quite capable in all aspects. I heard that your secretary position is temporarily vacant. Let's let Jiashue try, how about it? I don't agree. Jinwan's gaze turned cold, subconsciously rejecting. Mo Pailan abruptly glared at Jinwan, her eyes filled with displeasure. You don't agree? What right do you have to disagree? I'm asking about Jingshen. How could Jinwan not see through this aunt's intentions? She kept saying that she was not worthy of Mo Jingshen. Wasn't it because Mo Pailan wanted to find an opportunity to arrange for her daughter to be by his side so that the pavilion closest to the water could enjoy the moonlight first? Mo Pailan was divorced when she was very young, and her daughter took her surname. After all, she was not a member of the Mo family and was just a very ordinary cousin. However, if they could make a connection with Mo Jingshen in the future, they wouldn't have to think of ways to win over the elder's family. Of course, Jinwan wouldn't give them such an opportunity. Aunt, the Mo Corporation isn't an ordinary company. Every department's employees have to go through an examination of their qualifications before they can enter. How can the important position of the CEO's secretary be given to just anyone? In any case, the position of Jingshen's secretary is empty. It won't be easy to find someone suitable in such a short period of time. It won't be a big deal to let Jiashue go. What a busybody. Mo Pailan hated this eyesore Jinwan even more. Jinwan seemed to have heard something interesting. She smiled. Your daughter graduated from High University's business department at the age of 23. Before I was 18, I had already received a degree from MIT's finance department. If that's the case, don't you think I'm more suitable? I believe that cousin's company values ability more. Hearing this, Mo Jiashue abruptly stood up. She pushed up the frameless glasses on her nose and interjected. At the same time, her gaze was fixed on Mo Jingshen. After staring for a while, her face couldn't help but turn slightly red. The pure feelings of secretly liking him for a long time, as well as feelings of inferiority and anticipation, were all revealed. That's right. Jinwan, don't try to show off. I think that degree of yours was probably bought for you by the Ji family. You're not that old right now, only 20 years old. You don't have any work experience. Being a lazy and idle person is the most suitable for you. Mo Pailan glanced at her mockingly. At this moment, Mo Jingshen's phone rang. 2 minutes later he hung up. Jinwan tilted her head to ask, is there something important at the company that requires you to go over? No, there's a paper contract that I have to personally look through. Shenmu will send it to the U Garden before 5, Mo Jingshen said. One of his hands was still held by her, while the other was casually placed in his suit pocket. He coldly glanced at Mo Jiaxue, who had been standing by Mo Pailan's side with a red face. The Mo Corporation does value ability more, but as far as I know, Mo Jiaxue's graduation thesis was written by someone else. Her results in all aspects were not satisfactory. His tone was cold and indifferent, without any sharpness. However, he did not give the other party the slightest chance to continue pestering him. Mo Jiaxue's expression stiffened. Mo Pailan rushed to protect her daughter. How could something like a ghostwriter happen to my daughter? Jingshen, don't listen to hearsay. Jiaxue's results are very good. Mo Jingshen coldly curved his lips but did not look at them. He only looked at Jinwan. Are you tired? Jinwan shook her head. I'm not tired. I'm fine. Shinmu's speed was very fast. Before 5 o'clock, he had already sent the document to the U Garden. Mo Pailan kept looking for various topics to talk about, refusing to leave. When she saw the document, she quickly went to the door to receive it and then handed it to Mo Jiaxue. Under Mo Jingshen's cold gaze, Mo Jiaxue glanced at the document in her hands. With just one glance, she was instantly stunned. This was a document written entirely in English, and it was the extremely difficult kind of English. She was dazzled by all the difficult technical jargon. What are you standing there for? Send it over to your cousin. Mo Pailan gave her a look, indicating for her to take this opportunity to perform well. Mo Jiaxue paused. She awkwardly did not dare to look at Mo Jingshen's cold expression as she took the document. Mo Jingshen did not receive it, indifferently saying, "Didn't you want to prove your ability? Translate the first page. I want to hear it." The first page. Mo Jiaxue was embarrassed. She raised her eyes to look at him, but the moment she met Mo Jingshen's cold gaze, she immediately shivered. Such a difficult English document, how could she possibly translate it? She had never even turned outside. This kind of document was very unfamiliar to her. All of a sudden, a slender, white hand reached over, taking the document from her hands. Mo Jiaxue turned to see Jinwan's actions. She wanted to say something, but when the words reached her lips, she had no choice but to swallow them back down. Even if she did not recognize these, could it be that the usually idle Jinwan would? What document is this? Jinwan casually flipped through it, easily reading out the first few sentences in English. She then used the most concise and accurate translation method to say the important points that needed to be highlighted. After speaking, she raised her eyes to look at Mo Jiaxue, whose face had already turned red. Don't tell me you don't even recognize these? Mo Jiaxue was stunned. How could she forget that Jinwan had spent many years studying abroad? Chapter 23. The Mo Corporation is a listed company and often cooperates with foreign companies. If the CEO's secretary doesn't even know how to translate such a simple document, could she become a secretary just by sitting in front of the computer and drinking tea? Jinwan calmly retorted. Our Jiaxue can't become the CEO's secretary, but do you think a 20-year-old little girl who hasn't even grown her hair can? Mo Pailan was so angry that her words were incoherent. Then why don't you just say that you're relying on Jingshen's love and protection? Otherwise, you wouldn't have the qualifications to enter. Andy, you're being too impulsive. I was just using myself as an example. I studied abroad, but my father thought that I wasn't capable enough, so he arranged some advanced courses for me in the finance department in China. I haven't finished them yet and I haven't officially graduated yet. Besides, I'm really not old enough to go to the university. I definitely won't use my identity as Mrs. Mo to sneak into the company. Furthermore, the Mo Corporation isn't a place that just anyone can enter. What do you think? Jinwan was all smiles as she spoke. Mo Pailan was so angry that her face had turned white. Who was she calling an ugly melon? She actually called her precious daughter an ugly melon. Jingshen. Look at what kind of thing you've married into the Mo family. You actually use this kind of attitude to speak to your elders. Mo Pailan's anger was not light. Mo Jingshen's thin lips curved slightly. His gaze was calm as he said, "What she said is what I want to say. There's nothing wrong with it." Mo Pailan's gaze was filled with anger. Jingshen. When Jiaxue was young, she often visited the Mo family. You've always taken good care of her. Why is it that when it comes to this kind of matter, you're still siding with an outsider? What kind of bewitching drug did Jinwan give you? In the Mo family, I'm the host and you're the guests. Rather than saying that I'm taking care of you, it's more accurate to say that this is the most basic way to treat a guest, he calmly said. Mo Jingshan's words were calm and collected, but in an instant he had completely erased everything that was related to the Mo family. Every time she opened her mouth she would mention the Mo family. However, aside from her surname being Mo, which part of her had anything to do with the Mo family? They just wanted to gain a foothold in High City and had no choice but to rely on the powerful foundation of the Mo family. Mom, let's go. Mo Jiashue could tell from the document that she was indeed not qualified for the position of the CEO's secretary. At this moment she couldn't keep her face, so she could only persuade Mo Pylon in a low voice. She was a college graduate who had just graduated from the university. No matter how Jin Wan had been ridiculed earlier, she was still holding Mo Jingshan's hand and standing by his side steadily. There was not the slightest discomfort on her face. Perhaps Jin Wan had received high education since childhood. No matter what kind of situation she was in, her performance was always full of confidence and calmness. Her temperament was not comparable to that of any ordinary girl. This made Mo Jiashue feel even more inferior. Right now, she just wanted to leave this place as soon as possible to avoid humiliating herself. I won't go. Why should we leave? You haven't finished speaking. Mo Pylon said angrily, Jin Wan's surname is not Mo. Who does she think she is? Let the Mo family come here to judge right now. Mo Jiashue was so embarrassed by her mother's unreasonable appearance that she did not know what to do. She could only tug hard but could not move her. In the end, she simply kept quiet with reddened eyes. Madam, I'll send you back to your room to rest. It's too noisy here. Auntie Chen received Mo Jingshan's gaze and rushed to Jin Wan's side to speak softly. Jin Wan did not move. Her gaze met Mo Pylon's. She was about to speak when her hand was silently pressed down by Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan spoke softly and indifferently, Jin Wan is my wife. Her surname is not Mo? And where did you come to this conclusion? Mo Pylon's tone choked. She stiffened for a moment and began to argue irrationally, sooner or later we will still have to divorce. Mo Jingshan turned slightly, holding Jin Wan's hand. His words were directed at Mo Pylon. His thin lips were covered in ice, and his tone was as cold as frost. I respect you as an elder and have given you some face. Watch your words. Don't go overboard or it won't be easy for us to meet again in the future. Regardless of his figure, appearance, status, or calm and indifferent aura, the pressure Mo Jingshan gave off had always been like this. Although he appeared calm and unruffled, it was enough to suffocate people. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was truly angered, although there were no signs of it on the surface, the invisible coldness in the air caused a chill to run down Mo Pylon's spine. Jin Wan looked at the man who had always been protecting her, and her heart slightly palpitated. In fact, how could she not care about such women's gossip? However, Mo Jingshan's protection made her feel as though she had always been sheltered under his wings, warm and secure. You've grown up. You've also learned to bully us orphans and widows, haven't you? Mo Pylon suddenly appeared as though she had been wronged, her voice trembling. Mo Jingshan's gaze remained cold. If you don't leave, are you going to be thrown out? You guys. Mom, if we continue talking here, we won't be able to gain any benefits. Mo Jiashue tugged on Mo Pylon's sleeves. Don't talk about whether Jin Wan's cousin should get a divorce or not. Their relationship seems to be quite good. If you say such words here, it's clearly our fault. Mo Pylon gritted her teeth, lowering her voice as she turned back to say, You damn brat, what are you saying? Are you trying to boost others' prestige and destroy your own? How was this nonsense? Mo Jiashue raised her eyes to look again. She saw that Jin Wan's hand had been held by Mo Jingshan the entire time. The feeling that no third party could intervene was too obvious. Mo Jingshan had always been someone who did not show his emotions. Today she could see that he was truly angry. From start to finish he had been protecting Jin Wan. If they were to continue talking, not to mention the Yu Garden, they might not even be able to enter the Mo family's door. Mo Pylon was not stupid. It was not that she could not see that the current situation was very disadvantageous to her. It was fine to offend Jin Wan, but if they were to fall out with the Mo family because of this, it was easy to imagine the situation in the future. Even though her expression was ugly, before Mo Pylon pulled her daughter away, she said unhappily, Jin Wan, don't be too happy too early. Jingshan is not as simple as you think. You think he treats you well, spoils you and protects you. In reality, isn't it because of the family's interests? After all, the woman in his heart is already. Mom? Mo Jiashue saw Mo Jingshan's gaze and trembled all over. She rushed to interrupt her, pulling her out with force. The door opened and closed. When it closed with a ping sound. It was truly shocking. Jinwan paused for no reason because of the movement. Chapter 24. Mo Jingshan's gaze was deep and quiet. Don't pay attention to idle gossip. Jinwan, she did not say that she was going to pay attention to such strange words. Earlier there were outsiders around, so I didn't say anything. The hall is very cold and you came down without even putting on a jacket. Do you really want me to take a month off and stay at home to keep an eye on you? Mo Jingshan held her cold hand, his tone somewhat unkind. Cough, that, earlier I took a look at the document Assistant Shin sent over. It seems to be very important. Do you want to deal with the company's documents first? You're the most important. Before Jinwan could feel touched, she was directly brought upstairs by him. He did not even allow her to go down without putting on a jacket. Was this the legendary strict husband? At night, Mo Jingshan went to the bedroom but did not see Jinwan. He looked toward the closed bathroom door. Although there was no movement inside, there was indeed the sound of running water in the bathtub. He raised his wrist, glancing at the time. More than 10 minutes later, Jinwan still did not come out. Jinwan was indeed bathing in the bathroom. The water was slightly hot and she had been soaking for a long time. Her eyes were slightly blurred as she watched the steam rising in front of her. By her ears, she seemed to hear those words again. The woman he truly cares about has already... These words were probably just Mo Pylon deliberately trying to mystify things, right? After all, in 2 lifetimes the Mo Jingshan she had seen treated her very well. Not only could she see it with her eyes, she could also feel it with her heart. Furthermore, before they got married, she had tried to find some of Mo Jingshan's dark history as a reason to break off the marriage. She had even spent more than a month hiring people to secretly investigate Mo Jingshan. Although Mo Jingshan's whereabouts were uncertain and he was mysterious and low-key, and he seemed to have many bodyguards by his side, making it difficult to find him. But after a long period of observation, the result of the investigation was that there were a lot of women chasing after him. They wanted to marry him, loved him, and even threatened to jump off a building just to see him. There were women like those who wanted to marry him, who loved him, and who even threatened to jump off a building just to see him. They ranged from socialites in the celebrity circle to first-rate, second-rate, and third-rate female celebrities. However, Mo Jingshan did not give those women a chance. Even if one of them pestered him endlessly and threatened to kill themselves, he would not even look at them. In front of women, he would always maintain a calm and appropriate distance. It was difficult to understand and even more difficult to approach. His ascetic self-control and calmness. No. That night, he tormented her until her voice was hoarse from crying, but he still did not let her off. And last night she was burned to such a state, yet he could still get hard. Abstinence my ass, he was abstinent. The bathroom door was suddenly opened. Jinwan, who was lying on the bathtub in a daze, abruptly raised her eyes. She stared in shock at the man who strode into the bathroom. Amidst the white mist, the man's tall figure was somewhat dazzling. She narrowed her eyes and came back to her senses. Only then did she realize that she had been soaking in the water for too long. Her brain was dizzy and a little slow. What are you doing? I'm taking a shower. Her wet hair was scattered over her shoulders and back like black seaweed, and the water droplets on her face reflected the light in the bathroom. Mo Jingshan only took a look at her, pulled the towel over him and took her out of the water. Before she could say no, she was wrapped in the towel. Without saying a word, he carried her out. Mo Jingshan, I was showering. Why did you suddenly enter? I've already given you close to 20 minutes. The water is so hot and you've soaked for so long. Do you want to faint in there again? Jinwan heard his unkind tone and did not understand why he would suddenly lose his temper. She furrowed her brows. Then you could have just called me from outside. Mo Jingshan placed her on the bed, casually tugging the towel off her body. Jinwan's entire body felt cold. She was not wearing anything and subconsciously rolled around on the bed, wrapping herself in the blanket again. Didn't I help you bathe last night? Mo Jingshan tossed her towel to the side. But I can do it myself tonight. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear anything, tugging the blanket off her body. Jinwan was slightly at a loss due to his sudden domineeringness. Could it be that he did not sleep well last night, and seeing that her condition was better tonight, he wanted to make up for it? Mo Jingshan lifted the blanket and placed her in, calmly saying, Jinwan, the most important thing between a husband and wife is trust. No one's gossip should affect your emotions. His tone was too indifferent. Jinwan glanced at his light brows. Earlier in the bathroom she had really thought too much about things she should not have thought about. Did Mo Jingshan know how to read minds? Or was he too easily able to see through people's hearts? You don't want to sleep? Have you completely recovered from your illness? If you don't want to sleep, why don't we do something else? Jin Wan's fingers on the blanket involuntarily curled up. I'm still not fully recovered. Mo Jingshan bent over, reaching out to raise her chin. He lowered his eyes to lock his gaze on her face. Jin Wan was about to speak, but he took the opportunity to lower his head and kiss her. The deep kiss that exceeded her expectations caused her to feel slightly dizzy. It was only when her naked body began to curl up in the blanket that he gently bit down on her lips. He pressed his lips against hers, speaking hoarsely, "Sleep or sleep with me, choose one." Jin Wan covered her head with the blanket with a whoosh. Of course sleep. Mo Jingshan was suddenly so domineering. She was afraid that she would not be able to take it. When Jin Wan woke up, the warm sunlight from the bedroom shone on the bed. She narrowed her eyes to look out the window, then picked up her phone to check the time. Mo Jingshan had woken up earlier than her, and by this time he should have already gone to the company. Yesterday he had specially stayed at home to accompany her, but this morning he had a weekly company meeting. After resting at home for 2 days, her mental state was very good. She went to brush her teeth and wash her face. When she returned to the bedroom to change, the phone placed by the bedside rang. She walked over to take a look. It was a call from the Ji family. She could guess that her father must have received some news. Otherwise, with his smelly and stubborn temper, he would definitely not call her for no reason. "I heard that you plan on buying the 2 real estate companies in Han Tianyuan's hands?" The moment the call connected, Ji Hongwen coldly questioned her. And it had been a long time since she heard her father's voice. Jin Wan was momentarily dazed. Why didn't you discuss such a big matter with the family? Han Tianyuan, that trash, never knew how to do business. Not to mention the fact that the domestic real estate industry is not doing well, the 2 companies in his hands are already facing the risk of collapse. You actually want to spend 30 million to buy them? That kind of company, we can't even accept 1 million. Chapter 25. You brat, you've never cared about anything and have no interest in the company. All right, I won't force you. Ever since you got married, you've been throwing a tantrum. I know you've been unhappy, but you can't mess around like this. Dad, please believe me. The profits these 2 companies can bring in the next few years will be very impressive. Ji Hongwen was about to say something when he paused. This daughter of his had always been willful since she was young. Ever since her mother passed away and he remarried, she had never been polite to him. It was rare that she did not argue with him every time they called. But earlier she said, "Dad, please believe me." Such a sincere and modest tone did not seem to come from Jin Wan's mouth at all. Ji Hongwen paused for a moment, his tone still not good. Go back to the Ji home right now and explain things clearly. I'll send a driver over to pick you up. There's no need to pick me up. I'll drive back myself. Jin Wan's cold had already recovered. She originally planned to visit Xia Tian at the hospital after changing her clothes. She slowly said, "Xia Tian got into a car accident a few days ago and fractured her calf. I'll go to the hospital to visit her first." "All right, be careful when you drive. Don't be rash." Although Ji Hongwen's tone still sounded as cold as before, it had more or less eased up a little. Jin Wan smiled. "I'll be back before 6. Dad, don't forget to ask Auntie Chin to leave some food for me." Ji Hongwen was not used to his daughter suddenly speaking to him in such a gentle manner. He did not make a sound for a long time and finally hung up the phone with a ka. At around 6, Jin Wan drove back to the Ji home. The car had just entered the front yard of the Ji family's old home. Ji Minggran was playing with her phone on the balcony on the 2nd floor. When she saw Jin Wan's figure, she immediately put down her phone and looked toward her in shock. "Big sister? Why are you back?" Jin Wan appeared as though she did not see her. She parked the car and walked in. Auntie Chin had already come out to welcome her. "Eldest miss, you're finally back. It's been several months since I last saw you." "Auntie Chin, did you miss me?" Jin Wan smiled as she held onto Auntie Chin's arm. "Of course I did. How could I not miss you? Mr. Ji said that you'll be back for dinner tonight, so I specially made your favorite braised pork ribs and steamed lotus root." Aunt Chin smiled and patted her hand. "Now that you're back, do you want to stay at home for a few more days?" Before Jin Wan could reply, she saw her stepmother, Shinharu, walking out as well. Seeing that she had really returned to the Ji family, Shinharu's face was full of smiles as she pushed Auntie Chin to the side. She held Jin Wan's hand and said, "Nuan Wan, if you still hadn't returned, your father would have charged to the Mo family to demand for you. Jean Wan glanced at her and coldly withdrew her hand from her arm. She turned back to ask Auntie Chin, who had been pushed to the side, "Where's my dad?" Auntie Chin hurriedly said, "Mr. G hasn't been in a good mental state recently. He said that he was going back to his room to take a few pills before coming down." "Take medicine?" Jean Wan's expression did not change as she quickly walked up the stairs. "Ai Wan, don't quarrel with your father the moment you return. Ai, this child, why are you in such a rush to leave?" Shin Haru pretended to instruct her, but her gaze swept towards Auntie Chin, fiercely glaring at her. Auntie Chin retreated and did not speak further. Jean Wan quickly arrived outside Ji Hongwen's room. Just as she was about to knock on the door, she heard the sound of a cup being placed on the table. She decided to push the door open with force. Peng! A loud sound came from the door. Ji Hongwen held 2 white pills in his hand. He turned to look at Jean Wan, who had suddenly barged in, and frowned in displeasure. "How old are you? You don't know how to be serious. Why are you making such a big commotion just opening the door?" "Dad." Jean Wan walked over and reached out to stop him before he could place the pills in his mouth. "What medicine is this?" Jean Wan snatched the pills from his hand and then picked up the small medicine bottle on the table to examine it. It was filled with small English words. The general content was that this was a bottle of nourishing medicine suitable for middle-aged people to strengthen their bodies. "This is medicine that your Auntie Shin specially brought back from overseas when she went on a vacation. It's a whole set of health supplements. There are pills and pills." Ji Hongwen spoke simply and then looked at her unhappily. "Didn't you say that you would be back before 6? It's almost 6:30. You have no sense of time at all. It was rush hour earlier. There was a traffic jam," Jean Wan said as she held the medicine bottle tightly in her hand. In her previous life, Jean Wan felt that there was something strange about her father's death. Back then, because she had always been going against her family, she was not able to stay by her father's side even after he passed away. She had only seen him one last time in the hospital and did not have the chance to learn the true cause of his death from the doctor. However, on the death certificate, it was written that he had died from respiratory failure and a sudden heart attack. In her impression, her father's health had always been very good. He was only 50 when he passed away. How could his health suddenly deteriorate to such an absurd degree in just a few years? Even if the Ji family had gone bankrupt and was unlucky to a certain extent, it should not have caused him to die from a sudden cardiac arrest overnight. At that time, she was not at the Ji home and was not clear about the situation. Earlier, when she heard Auntie Chin say that he was taking medicine in his room, Jean Wan suddenly thought of this. Her father was not sick at all. Why would he suddenly take medicine? Shin Haru said that it was a health supplement, so it must be? Jean Wan did not forget that many of Shin Haru's family members studied medicine and concoction. What exactly was going on with this medicine? It was definitely not simple. "Why are you still holding on to my medicine? Hurry and put it down." Ji Hongwen stood up and glared at Jean Wan. "Also, you have to give me a proper explanation about those 2 companies today." Jean Wan raised her eyes and avoided this topic. She seriously said, "Dad, can you let me take this medicine for a few days? I'll let the people from the Food and Drug Administration check the ingredients inside." Ji Hongwen furrowed his brows and angrily said, "Nonsense. Check what ingredients? Your Auntie Shin has been married to me for more than 10 years. How can you suspect the medicine she buys? No wonder, even though we both call her Auntie Shin, Meng Ran's relationship with her is as close as a mother and daughter. Yet, you treat her as though she's your enemy, never giving her any face at all." The room door was suddenly pushed open. Ji Meng Ran gently pushed the door open and stood there. She stuck her head in and obediently asked, "I just passed by and heard the commotion inside. Dad, big sister just came back and you 2 are already quarreling again? It's none of your business. Get out." Ji Hongwen glared at the door. Ji Meng Ran made an "oh" sound and gently closed the door. Although her father had yelled at her, Ji Meng Ran was not affected in the slightest. Instead, she gloated as she walked away. Chapter 26. Aunt Chin and the Ji family servants had already prepared dinner. When Ji Hongwen came downstairs, Shin Haru and Ji Mengran saw his cold and stern expression. He didn't even look at Jean Wan, who was behind him. Seeing this scene, Ji Mengran took the opportunity to speak up. "Dad, don't be angry with my sister. It's rare for her to return home. She must have gotten into an argument with brother Jing Shin. Why don't you just let her stay at the Ji home tonight? Anyway, even if she returns to the Yu garden, brother Jing Shin might not be there. What's the matter again?" Ji Hongwen glanced at Jin Wan behind him. It's been half a year. When will you stop thinking about divorce? Jin Wan looked toward Ji Minggran. Very good, he was going to attack her as soon as he arrived. Ji Minggran knew that her divorce was the fuse of the conflict between her and her father, but she still brought it up. Shinharu did not speak but glanced at Jin Wan. She knew that Jin Wan would always make a fuss because of Mo Jingshin's matters. She did not speak and calmly waited to watch the show. Dad, I came back this time to apologize to you. Before she walked to the dining table, she reached out and took Ji Hongwen's arm. I was too capricious in the past. I didn't know that everything you arranged for me was the best. I always went against you. I'm really sorry. Ji Hongwen's expression faltered as he looked at her in astonishment. They actually didn't quarrel? Jin Wan actually apologized? Ji Minggran and Shinharu did their best to conceal the shock in their eyes. How was this possible? In the past I was too stubborn. After marrying Jingshin, I kept throwing a tantrum because I was unhappy. But after all, a person's heart is made of flesh. After a long time, you will realize the good in each other. Now, I don't want a divorce and I've decided to live a good life with Jingshin. I won't let you worry about me anymore. As Jin Wan spoke, she sat down with Ji Hongwen and suddenly turned to look at Ji Minggran. Actually, I've already mentioned this idea to Minggran a few days ago, right, Minggran? Ji Minggran froze for a moment when the topic was suddenly directed at her. Jin Wan had indeed said this before. Ji Minggran had been lucky enough to think that she had given up on the divorce because she had lost her mind for a moment, and she had never told her father about it. Ji Minggran couldn't lie in front of her and could only smile. I left in a hurry that day and almost forgot about it. Sister did say that. She said she had thought it through and didn't plan to divorce again. Ji Minggran suddenly brought herself up. Ji Minggran couldn't lie to her. Jin Wan smiled at her. It looked like they shared a deep sisterly love and smiled at each other tacitly. However, Ji Minggran was Ji's smile. Jin Wan smiled at Ji. You believe me this time, right? I really want to be with Jingshin. Jin Wan held onto Ji Hongwen's arm. Her voice was soft and gentle, like a little girl who had always been obedient and acting spoiled. Jin Wan had never acted coquettishly since she grew up. The softness in Ji Hongwen's heart was touched, and his anger immediately lessened. All right, it's good that you know Jingshin is good. After marriage, two people need to get used to each other. It's not too late for you to think things through. If there's any conflict between the two of you, just tell the family. Don't always throw a tantrum and don't always be so immature, understand? I understand, Dad. Jin Wan leaned her head on his shoulder. I apologize for the wrong things I said and did when I was stubborn in the past. Please don't be angry at me anymore, okay? Humph, there's no use in apologizing now. Let's not talk about anything else. Don't think that you can easily get away with the matter of those two companies. I'll explain this matter to you later. Ji Hongwen clearly still felt that she was unreliable on this matter. He waved his hand to say, all right, let's eat first. It's rare for you to come back after getting married. It's not easy for you to have such an understanding. In the beginning, I didn't expect you to return to the Ji home with Jingshin. But now that the relationship between you two has improved, you should come back with him. Don't always be alone. If others see you, they'll make a big fuss about your marriage. That's right. Wan, since you want to be with Jingshin, why didn't you come back with him? Don't tell me you're just coaxing your father? The moment Ji Hongwen finished speaking, Shinharu interrupted. Her face was full of smiles, but her eyes carried traces of mockery. Ji Hongwen glared at Shinharu. It's none of your business. In the morning, I was the one who called Jin Wan to come back immediately. It was just a spur-of-the-moment idea. Jingshin isn't someone who has free time all the time. How could he possibly find the time to come back with her? But I feel that big sister and brother Jingshin's relationship isn't that reliable. A few days ago they were clearly fighting so hard. Ji Minggran muttered softly as she ate. Previously they were clearly about to fall out. Suddenly you're saying that you're not going to divorce him. Big sister, do you have other thoughts and are purposely hiding it from us? Ji Minggran spoke with an innocent expression, as though she was just asking out of curiosity. Jin Wan continued holding on to Ji Hongwen's arm, coldly glancing at her. What thoughts can I have? Jingshin and I have been married for quite some time. After spending so much time with each other, we should just stay together. Marriage is simple. Why would there be so many messy thoughts? Why would there be so many whys? That's right. It's best to keep things simple. Ji Hongwen nodded. After Jin Wan's coquettishness, this father's heart, which had been dulled by her, was slightly unable to adapt. However, he was also very gratified. Actually, before Jinwan returned to the Ji home, she had indeed planned to ask if Mo Jingshan had time. However, after considering that her father was going to question her about Han Tianyuan's two companies, and that Ji Minggran and Shin Haru were still at home, she knew that she would definitely be in a mess when she returned home. Thus, after much consideration, she did not mention this matter to him. Furthermore, she did not wish for Ji Minggran to have any more contact with Mo Jingshan. Otherwise she would feel disgusted. Ji Minggran endured it and did not speak further. However, she secretly glanced at Shin Haru. The relationship between Jinwan and her father was becoming more and more rigid. The one benefiting from this was definitely Shin Haru. Right now, Jinwan was suddenly so obedient. Seeing that the ice between father and daughter had been broken, how could Shin Haru still sit still? Auntie Shin, don't you feel that my sister has changed a little too much? Ji Minggran casually asked. Right now, Shin Haru was indeed suspicious. Why did this Jinwan suddenly change? Why was she so obedient and sensible? Nwanwana, Auntie Shin hasn't seen you for a long time. Come sit by Auntie Shin's side. Shin Haru smiled as she pointed to another seat by her side. That was a seat slightly further away from Ji Hongwen. Jinwan did not move from the seat closest to Ji Hongwen. It was as though she did not hear her words. She calmly said, Dad, there's nothing wrong with your body. In the future, don't take too much medicine. Those unclear medicines sound like health supplements, but in reality they will more or less destroy your body's resistance. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.